Chapter 82. To be honest, the real reason why Qinshi wanted to go to Shangjing so quickly was, he had money. After all, Shangjing was the capital of a country, and the cost of living there was not low. A few years ago, it was very popular to move to the north. Many outsiders with dreams came for the first time. At first, they did not even have a stable income and could not afford the rent, so they could only live in extremely bad conditions in the basement. That kind of life was very bitter just thinking about it. Qinshi was not afraid of hunger or cold. He was completely a humanoid mecha, and the kind that did not consume electricity. If it were not for the little girl, he would have gone straight to Shangjing the moment he received the news about Yingying. It was not easy being a father, and he was afraid that his child would be wronged. So no matter how much he longed for it, he could only take good care of his child first. Now that he had money, Qinshi could finally fulfill his ambitions. He took Nyanyan to eat and play along, and slowly walked and looked for her. He treated it as a vacation. Yingying last appeared in Shangjing, and it had been 3 years since then. So, Qinshi did not have high expectations for the result of this trip. He really did not have much hope. But what was the difference between a person without dreams and a salted fish? He had to try first. Now that he thought about it, Qinshi really regretted it. If he had known that 100 years in the heavenly jade world was only a year on Earth, he would have cultivated for a while more before returning. It was all because he was too excited when he received the news that he did not want to wait a moment longer. He set off in a hurry and paid a heavy price because of it. He had not been able to comprehend the true meaning of the word void, so he had not been able to step into the void transformation realm. This was also the reason why his master said that this was the end of his life. If he could calm down and cultivate in seclusion for 100 years, even if he had not stepped into the void transformation realm, he would have touched the threshold. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets. Qinshi's return was exchanged for by burning his blood essence. If the spirit energy of heaven and earth was the origin of all things, then blood essence was the origin of immortal cultivators. Using a forbidden technique to burn his blood essence to obtain a cultivation that was far beyond his current realm was a helpless choice to destroy his future. Qinshi didn't really care about his future. He was just regretting that he could no longer use his spiritual sense. Otherwise, with his cultivation level, why would he need to go through so much trouble to find someone? The next morning, the flight was booked for 2:40 p.m., first class. Therefore, after breakfast, Qinshi was very cooperative and sang, "Where are we going, Daddy?" with the little girl. The father and daughter were singing happily when suddenly, there was a light knock on the door. Qinshi frowned and glanced at the door, but he did not immediately get up to open it. The little fellow was sitting beside Qinshi. When she heard the knock on the door, she immediately shouted excitedly, "Someone is knocking on the door, someone is knocking on the door." Qinshi did not move, and the little fellow immediately became anxious. She quickly shook his arm and shouted, "Papa, someone is knocking on the door. Open the door." "Got it." Qinshi pinched her little face. Only then did he get up and open the door under the little fellow's constant urging. There were 3 people standing outside the door. A middle-aged man in his 40s. Behind the middle-aged man stood 2 big men in black suits, who were obviously bodyguards. After seeing Qinshi open the door, the middle-aged man turned his head to the 2 bodyguards and said, "You go down and wait for me." After that, the middle-aged man turned his head and looked at Qinshi. He asked enthusiastically, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Qinshi?" "Yes, I am." "What's the matter?" "Oh, hello, it's like this," the middle-aged man laughed and said politely. After a pause, he continued to ask, "I want to take the liberty of asking you a question. Excuse me, do you know Ning Zhonghua?" After that, the middle-aged man stared at Qinshi's expression, as if he wanted to see something from his face. However, Qinshi's answer was somewhat out of his expectations. It seemed that he did not mean to hide it at all. Qinshi nodded directly and replied, "Yes." The middle-aged man was stunned. He did not expect Qinshi to admit it so quickly. However, he was also experienced, so he immediately laughed and said, "That's great. Hello, Mr. Chen, my name is Su Wei. I've been friends with Ning Zhonghua for many years. After that, Su Wei laughed and extended his right hand to Chen Shi. Out of politeness, Chen Shi shook his hand. Su Wei saw that Chen Shi's attitude towards him was quite friendly, so he looked around. After confirming that there was no one else around, he said mysteriously, Mr. Chen, I have something to talk to you about. I wonder if you're free now. After that, Su Wei glanced behind Chen Shi, hinting that he wanted to enter the house. However, Chen Shi had no intention of letting him in. He said directly, the family next door went out for the Mid-Autumn Festival yesterday. If you have anything to say it here. Listening to his tone, he seemed to be a little impatient. Seeing this, Su Wei could only look around again and said in a low voice, I'm here this time mainly to talk to you about the pill, so it might be a bit inconvenient to talk here. Hearing this, Chen Shi suddenly laughed. After he looked at Su Wei from head to toe, he looked at Su Wei and said, You're very good. Yesterday, Ning Zhonghua just delivered the mooncakes, and today, Su Wei came looking for him. It had to be said that Su Wei was really good at finding people and analyzing information. As a businessman, Su Wei was obviously a successful businessman. Su Wei smiled politely. Just as he was about to say something, Chen Shi continued, This pill is for sale to anyone. I can sell it to you for 10 million per pill. However, you still need to help me find someone, how about that? Su Wei was a little confused. He felt like this young man in front of him was a bit too direct. He was so honest that he began to wonder if this person was a liar. Chen Shi was a secret weapon for Ning Zhonghua. So except for Zhang Jiada, Ning Zhonghua never mentioned Chen Shi to anyone. But unfortunately, Ning Zhonghua was just a businessman after all, not a senior government official. So he couldn't hide a secret at all. Therefore, Su Wei easily learned about the existence of Chen Shi from the driver. Although the price was a bit high, everything was worth it. When Su Wei learned from the driver that Ning Zhonghua respected a young man very much, he immediately sent people to investigate this young man. Although he was still a little uncertain whether the pill in Ning Zhonghua's hand was obtained from this young man. But there was no doubt that this young man was definitely not simple. Therefore, Su Wei immediately came to visit. What he didn't expect was that this young man actually admitted it directly and even made his request directly. Chen Shi waited for a while. Seeing that Su Wei didn't immediately answer after listening to his request, he frowned and asked, Is there a problem? Su Wei just hesitated out of caution. Seeing that Chen Shi was urging him, he immediately nodded and said, No problem. What a joke, that pill in Ning Zhonghua's hand was sold for 100 million. But Su Wei also knew that 100 million for one pill was the price Ning Zhonghua got through the auction. Once the second batch of pills came out, everyone would understand that this pill could be mass-produced. Naturally, it wouldn't be sold at such a high price. Su Wei thought that although it couldn't be sold for 100 million, 30 to 50 million shouldn't be a big problem, right? This was a good deal. Seeing that Su Wei agreed, Chen Shi nodded and then shouted into the house, Big cat, help me get the small white bottle on the table. Then, in front of Su Wei's stunned expression, Chen Shi slowly took the small bottle from the big cat's mouth and handed it to Su Wei. 10 pills, 100 million, when will it be paid? Old Tai, you rewarded me with 100,000 coins for 20 chapters? Rich. Unfortunately, I can't eat it, unless I kill Zhao Yuan's entire family to get enough. Chapter 83. After Su Wei left Kongju community and got into his car, he still felt like he was living in a dream. It was too smooth, it was so smooth that he couldn't help but wonder if he had been tricked. That Mr. Chen didn't look like a hidden expert at all. Instead, he looked more like the owner of a small store on the ground floor of the community. He smoked all day, sat in front of the cashier with his legs crossed, and watched TV. He didn't care when customers came, and when the customers finished choosing, he would naturally take the initiative to put the money on the cashier. All he had to do was count the money. Mr. Su, where are we going? The driver's voice awakened Su Wei from his chaotic thoughts. He froze for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said, To the lab. Although it was almost impossible for Ning Zhonghua to predict that he would set a trap for him here, Su Wei was still a little worried, so he was going to let the lab test the ingredients of this pill again to make sure that the 10 pills in his hand were exactly the same as the previous ones. Su Wei didn't dare to let his employees test the pills again. After all, this pill was too expensive. Su Wei didn't know Chen Shi as well as Ning Zhonghua, so it was normal for him to have some doubts. But in fact, in Chen Shi's eyes, this pill was only fit to be a snack for the big cat. The energy pill was mainly used to improve a person's physique and heal chronic diseases in the human body, so the effect was very obvious for the first time. The reason Chen Shi didn't refine a higher-level pill was mainly because the little girl was too young. Chen Shi still wanted her to have a normal childhood. Otherwise, the little girl would become a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus if she ate a higher-level pill. How could she play with other children then? Before he could scare others, the little girl would already think of him as an alien. After lunch, Chen Shi looked at the time and thought that it was about time to leave, so he put a note on the door. "I'm going somewhere far away." But this time, he didn't write down when he would be home, but left his phone number. After all, he didn't know how long he would stay in Shangjing, so it was safer to leave his number. This trip was still as light and simple as last time. Chen Shi didn't bring any luggage. He planned to buy new clothes for the little fellow when they arrived in Shangjing. They arrived at the airport. Perhaps the painful experience last time had left a shadow in the big cat's heart, so it was unwilling to get down from the little guy's arms. Seeing this, Chen Shi could only glare at it fiercely. Chen Shi's eyes were very lethal, so Big Cat immediately cowered. Thus, it had no choice but to obediently jump down from the little fellow's arms and leap out like a black shadow. Even though both Shangjing and Zhonghai were international first-tier cities, there was still a clear difference between them. As the saying goes, Shangjing is noble, Zhonghai is foreign. Zhonghai had only been open for about 160 years, but Shangjing was an ancient city with a history of over 3,000 years. Therefore, Zhonghai was still too young compared to Shangjing. Shangjing was an inland city, and there were many industries, so the smog was very serious. However, Chen Shi chose a good day, because it was almost National Day, so the factories near Shangjing began to arrange to stop work, ready to give the city a chance to breathe. This also allowed the father and daughter, who had just arrived in Shangjing, to see the blue sky and white clouds. The autumn air was refreshing, and the hall was full of ginkgo trees. After getting off the plane, Chen Shi carried the little fellow in a taxi and went straight to the hotel. Shangjing received more than 200 million tourists a year. It was a very developed tourism city, and now it was the Mid-Autumn Festival, so Chen Shi searched for a long time before he found a 5-star hotel with empty rooms near the Summer Palace. The hotel was called Pear Garden, and the architectural style leaned towards the ancient Chinese style. As soon as the father and daughter walked into the hotel, it was as if they had arrived at an ancient palace. There were pavilions, corridors, cornices, and arches everywhere. It really had a special charm. The little fellow had been in Zhonghai for a long time, and suddenly came to a place full of cultural heritage, and was deeply attracted in an instant. The cost of living in Shangjing was much higher than in Amei, so the same high-end villa suite, the same single-family courtyard, the price of the Pear Garden was as high as 18,000 yuan. There was no hot spring in this courtyard, so the little fellow pouted and was very unhappy. But when she walked into the room and came to the master bedroom, she immediately became excited, and jumped onto the bed, and then happily rolled on the bed. It was a frame bed with a moon cave door, and there were red sandalwood dragons on the 4 pillars. In addition, the size of the bed was obviously much larger than an ordinary bed, so it looked a bit like the bed of an emperor. The little fellow seemed to like this smell, so she was unwilling to get up from the bed. Perhaps the flight was tiring, the little fellow lay down for a while and actually fell asleep just like that. Seeing her comfortable appearance, the big cat also jumped onto the bed, and then curled up next to the little fellow to take a nap. Chen Shi glanced at the little fellow, and then gently covered the little fellow with the quilt. He silently sat at the end of the bed, quietly looking at the little fellow's sleeping face. After an unknown amount of time, the sun had already set, and the little fellow slowly woke up. She sleepily rubbed her eyes, and then seemed to be frightened by the dim room, and quickly sat up with her hand supporting her. When she saw Chin-Shi sitting next to her, she pouted and said, "Papa, I'm hungry." Hearing this, Chin-Shi immediately smiled and hugged her in his arms. After washing her in the bathroom, he took the little fellow to the Pear Garden restaurant. Because of the special status of Shangjing, Shangjing cuisine could be said to be a collection of national culinary skills. Not only could they make the incomparably extravagant Manchu Han Imperial Feast, but they could also make delicious and inexpensive folk snacks. Shangjing roast duck was the model of Shangjing cuisine. With its bright red color, tender meat, mellow taste, and fatty but not greasy characteristics, it was known as the world's most delicious dish. The little fellow held a drumstick in each hand, and chewed until her mouth was full of oil. The big cat looked at the little fellow's intoxicated eating manner, and immediately its appetite was aroused. It eagerly squatted on the chair next to him, and its saliva almost flowed out. But Chin-Shi was busy taking care of the little fellow, and did not have time to pay attention to it, so the big cat hesitated for a moment, and under the incomparably surprised gaze of the waiter, it jumped onto the table by itself, and began to gnaw on a chicken wing. This family was really strange, daring to have a pet with a child, and even allowing pets to be at the table. After dinner, it was almost 8:00 in the evening, so Chin-Shi could not take the little fellow to the summer palace. Back in the courtyard, Chin-Shi sat on the rocking chair with the little fellow in his arms. Chin-Shi did not tell the little fellow the purpose of this trip. In fact, he was afraid that after he said it, the little fellow would have expectations. Because of expectations, there would be disappointment. Chin-Shi did not want to disappoint Ninian. He also did not want to disappoint Ying. So, no matter what, he had to find Ying. Even if he had to turn Sijou City upside down. Thank you, Miss Ning Xiaojia, for being promoted to the chief. Thank you, Miss, quietly watching flowers bloom and fall, for the reward of 10,000 coins. Chapter 84. Shangjing used to be called Sijou City. In ancient times, Shangjing City was divided into the Outer City, Inner City, Imperial City, and Forbidden City. What was Sijou City? In fact, it was the 4 gates of the Imperial City and the 9 gates of the Inner City. The 4 gates of the Imperial City were Tian and Men, Di and Men, Dong and Men, and Shi and Men. The 9 gates of the Inner City were Dong and Men, Shi and Men, Chaiyang Men, Fu and Men, Chongwen Men, Xuanwu Men, Dishing Men, Anding Men, and Qian Men. These gates were very famous. Even people who had never been to Shangjing might have heard of them from newspapers and television. When some of the older people in Shangjing were bragging, they would tell others that their ancestors lived in Sijou City with their Beijing accent. That was because in the Qing dynasty, the emperor lived in the Forbidden City, the royal family lived in the Imperial City, and the commoners and Han people could only live in the Outer City. By saying this, he was actually trying to express that his ancestors were relatives of the imperial family. As for whether it was true or not, only God knew. Taizu once said, "The temple is small, but the gods are big, and the pond is shallow." However, that was decades ago. Shangjing's pond was not shallow now. It was not an exaggeration to say that there were hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Just like a joke, if one stood on the street and threw a brick casually, it might hit a few officials. After all, this was the capital, and also a famous historical city that had been passed down for thousands of years. The magnificent history had been blown away by the wind and rain, and the world had changed, but Shangjing's majestic city still stood there. This was the origin of its unique charm. At 8:30 in the evening, it was neither too early nor too late. In addition, the little girl had already slept, so after Chin-Shi accompanied her in the courtyard for a while, she started to clamor about going out to see Tian Anmen. This was outside the 4th Ring Road. It would take more than an hour to take the subway from Summer Palace to Tiananmen. Even if there were no traffic jams at night, it would take at least 40 minutes. Therefore, Chin-Shi wisely rejected her request. The little girl refused and kept clamoring to go out and play. She almost rolled on the ground and threw a tantrum. She had just woken up and eaten, so of course, she was full of energy. Seeing this, She had no choice but to agree to take her to Summer Palace. The Summer Palace would open at 8 o'clock, and tourists were not allowed to enter. However, She did not intend to enter from the front door. He carried the little girl and walked around the outside of the Summer Palace. Eventually, they arrived at a secluded path. After that, She looked around and confirmed that there were no cameras around. He held the little fellow in his arms and lightly stepped on the ground. His entire body was like a light bird as he lightly flew over the wall. While She was flying, the little girl's eyes widened as she stared blankly at the treetops that were getting closer and closer. Behind the wall was the embankment of the lake, where there was a stretch of towering trees. She gently landed on the ground with the little fellow in his arms. At this moment, the little fellow seemed to have finally regained his senses. She waved her hands and immediately opened her mouth to shout, "Papa, we are flying. It's flying." The child's scream was very sharp. It pierced through the calm night sky and traveled toward the sparkling Kunming Lake. She quickly put his index finger on her mouth and said, "Shoo. Daddy didn't buy a ticket. If someone finds out, we will be kicked out." Hearing this, the little guy immediately covered his mouth with both hands, revealing a pair of quick-witted eyes that were rolling around. This was the first time She showed his ability in front of the little fellow. However, the little fellow's reaction was not as big as he expected. A child's imagination was very rich. Many children would fantasize that their father was Superman. Therefore, when She showed his inhuman side, the little fellow was not surprised. Instead, she was very excited. She covered her mouth with her hands and kept making woo-woo sounds. Seeing her like this, it seemed that she wanted to say something, but was afraid that she would be kicked out. Therefore, she could only cover her mouth tightly and did not dare to say anything. Seeing her excited look, She did not know whether to laugh or cry. After setting up a sound insulation restriction, he said with a smile, "What do you want to say? You can say it now. Daddy is so awesome." After saying that, the little fellow kissed She's face heavily. Then, she pointed to a small island in Kunming Lake and shouted, "Daddy. I want to go there. Take me there." "Okay, let's go. Where is Mount Yen? Where is Mount Yen?" Unparalleled romance belongs to Kunming. Kunming Lake used to be called Wangshan Lake. It was a natural lake formed by many springs in the northwest suburbs of Shangjing. During the reign of Emperor Qianlong ordered the construction of Qingyi Garden next to Wangshan Lake. Then, the lake was developed and formed into the current scale. The name of Kunming Lake was taken from the story of Emperor Wu of Han, who opened the Kunming Lake in Chang, and to practice naval warfare. In 1860, Qingyi Garden was burned down by the British and French army. In 1888, Cixi ordered the reconstruction and renamed Summer Palace. Unfortunately, in 1900, Summer Palace was destroyed by the Eight-Power Army. It was really a fate full of misfortunes. The area of Kunming Lake was about 3/4 of the total area of Summer Palace. Shi had already looked at the map before coming, so he was very clear about where he was now. There were 3 small islands in Summer Palace. Shi was now near the Mirror Pavilion Island. The place that the little fellow wanted to go to was the Mirror Pavilion. Most of the scenic spots in Summer Palace were concentrated on the Longevity Mountain in the north. Looking from afar, one could see a scene of bright lights. The Mirror Pavilion was originally a watchtower to prevent villagers from entering. However, during the reign of Emperor Guangxu, because there was no money to repair the Mirror Pavilion that was destroyed by the British and French armies' heavy artillery, the remaining materials were dismantled for other purposes. Since then, the Mirror Pavilion had become a deserted island in the water and had never been repaired. The weather in Shangjing was good recently. In addition, it was the Mid-Autumn Festival, so the moon had been rising for several nights in a row. Shi carried the little fellow to the lake and used his hand to scratch her nose. Then, he smiled and asked, "Daddy will show you a magic trick, okay?" "Okay." I want to see a magic trick. Hearing this, Chin-shi nodded and prepared to play a magic trick to tease her. But then, Chin-shi seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said to the little fellow seriously, "This is a magic trick. If you want to learn, Daddy can teach you in the future. But before you learn it, don't do what I do. It's very dangerous, do you understand?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded in agreement like a chick pecking at rice. "I know, I won't learn it secretly. I'll only learn if Daddy teaches me." "Good girl." Chin-shi gently patted the little fellow's head. Then, under the little fellow's slightly dazed gaze, he slowly stepped on the water. People can walk on water? Everything that was happening in front of her was clearly beyond the scope of the little fellow's understanding. So, she immediately opened her mouth and said, "Daddy," but as soon as she shouted, the little fellow reacted. Then, she quickly covered her mouth with her hand and let Chin-shi take her slowly to the deserted island. It was not until Chin-shi walked a distance that the little fellow seemed to finally come to her senses. She did not feel afraid. Instead, she curiously rested her chin on Chin-shi's shoulder and looked at Chin-shi's heels. She saw that every time Chin-shi took a step, there would be a circle of faint ripples on the surface of the lake. The night breeze blew by Kunming Lake, and the moonlight shone on the surface of the lake, making it sparkling. Chin-shi held the little fellow. Chapter 85. The Pavilion of Mirrors was located on the west bank of Kunming Lake, commonly known as Tuancheng. Therefore, this lake on the southwest side of Kunming Lake was also known as Lake Tuancheng. The outer circle of the Pavilion of Mirrors was about 60 meters in diameter. It was a circular water fortress. Unfortunately, it was destroyed during the reign of Cixi. Now, only a desolate island of ruins remained. Lake Tuancheng was the destination of the south to north water transfer project. It was also the main source of drinking water in Shangjing. Because there were too many people who came here to swim, in order to protect the water source, the government could only pay the price of destroying the summer palace and depriving the tourists of the view. They invested tens of millions to increase the height and increase the fence to prevent tourists from entering. Thus, it was difficult to recreate the scenery of Lake Tuancheng. There were no private cruises on Kunming Lake. Therefore, if one wanted to get to the Pavilion of Mirrors, they could either secretly swim over the fence or wait for the lake to freeze in winter and step on the ice to get there. This place had been sealed for a long time. It was indeed a bit desolate. In addition, it was already late. The lush trees on the island blocked most of the moonlight. Therefore, it looked gloomy and was especially scary. Chin-shi carried the little girl and gently stepped onto the Pavilion of Mirrors. What he saw was a burnt tree. Its mottled shadow echoed with the scarred city wall behind it. Through the gaps between the tree roots, he could see the shadow of the Jade Spring Mountain Pagoda in the distance. This place was too remote and gloomy. Therefore, the little girl immediately became afraid. She could only shrink into Chin-shi's arms as much as possible. Her small hands hugged Chin-shi tightly. Her palms were cold. This also made Chin-shi frown slightly. He originally thought that the Pavilion of Mirrors was a good place. He didn't expect to find that it was just a desolate ruin. It was not good to scare the child. Therefore, Chin-shi gently placed his left hand on the little girl's head. He carried her and prepared to leave. However, before leaving, Chin-shi suddenly raised his head and looked thoughtfully at the abandoned city wall that was more than 10 meters high. He then stepped on the water again and slowly left. Back at the hotel, the little girl was a bit unhappy. She was probably frightened. Even when Chin-shi said that he would play games with her, she was not interested at all. Chin-shi had no choice but to hug her and sit on the bed. Then, he told her Andersen's fairy tales. The story wasn't important. What was important was that her father was by her side. Therefore, the little fellow wrapped herself in the soft quilt and lay in Chin-shi's arms, listening to his long-winded story. Finally, she slowly relaxed and fell into a deep sleep. The next day, before dawn. Perhaps because she was frightened last night, the little girl seemed to be having a nightmare. Before she woke up, she waved her little hands and murmured in a daze, "Papa. Papa, Daddy is here." She was sitting cross-legged beside her. When he heard her cry, he immediately checked on her condition. Then, he placed his hand on the little fellow's forehead and said softly, "Daddy is here. Baby, don't be afraid, don't be afraid." Perhaps Shi's comfort was effective. The little girl hugged Shi's wrist, then changed her position and continued to sleep. Shi's wrist was grabbed by her, so he couldn't move casually. So, he could only maintain this awkward position and quietly look at the little girl's sleeping face. His eyes were very gentle, full of a kind of fatherly love. Zhonghai. Jin City Villa. In Ning Zhonggua's study. Mr. Hu sat on the sofa quietly, waiting for Ning Zhonggua's reply. He had been with Ning Zhonggua since he was 18 years old. Now, it had been more than 20 years. As for him, he had slowly climbed up the ladder to become the vice president of the Zhonghai Ocean Group from his position as a storekeeper. Mr. Hu's education level was not high. After dropping out of junior high school, he came out to work. If it weren't for Ning Zhonggua's promotion, he would not have been able to get to where he was today. Therefore, in Mr. Hu's heart, Ning Zhonggua was his benefactor and also his benefactor who gave him a chance to prove his value in life. After listening to Mr. Hu's report, Ning Zhonggua frowned slightly. After careful consideration, Ning Zhonggua asked, "Are you sure the news is true?" Mr. Hu immediately nodded and said with certainty, "It's absolutely true. Su Wei must have Mr. Chen's elixirs, but I'm not sure how many he has for the time being. How did he find Mr. Chen?" After saying that, without waiting for Mr. Hu to answer, Ning Zhonggua suddenly seemed to think of something. He suddenly shook his head and laughed. After gently shaking his head, he sighed as if he was deeply moved. "Other than you, only old Lu and Qiu Tong know about Mr. Chen's existence. Yesterday, Mr. Lu suddenly took a long leave. I really thought he had something urgent to deal with. I really didn't expect that Mr. Lu would betray me one day." Mr. Hu did not speak. Although he was the vice president and old Lu was the chauffeur, old Lu had more experience than him if they were to compare. Ning Zhonggua would never mistreat his confidants. Mr. Hu wanted to climb up the ranks, so Ning Zhonggua let him sit in the vice president position. His position in the Ocean Group was second only to Ning Qiudong. Mr. Lu was not so career-oriented. Ning Zhonggua wanted to transfer him many times, but Mr. Lu refused with a smile. Therefore, Ning Zhonggua could only give him a big red packet every year, which was as thick as Mr. Hu's annual salary. Ning Zhonggua sighed for a while, but he did not seem to care too much about this matter. After taking a sip of tea, he said casually, "Forget it, I guess Su Wei's methods are too powerful, and Mr. Lu might have something that he can't say. Anyway, you can deal with it as you see fit. You don't have to ask me about this anymore." "Okay." Hearing this, old Hu nodded his head heavily. A cold light flashed in his slightly narrowed eyes. After Ning Zhonggua finished talking about Mr. Lu, he thought for a while and then gently put down the teacup. After a moment of silence, he said to Mr. Hu, "Su Wei probably found Mr. Chen before he went to Shangjing. How about this, you put the company's business aside first, and I'll give you 2 important tasks." "Sure. The first task, starting from today, you will do your best to find a woman named Qin Ruoying. This woman is Mr. Chen's partner. She has been missing for 3 years and was last seen in Shangjing. Mr. Chen probably went to Shangjing to find her. But I think you can start with Zhonghai University. This woman's identity is not simple, so there is no upper limit to the mission budget. When you need money, just go to the finance department. If you encounter any difficulties, let me know immediately, and I will help." "Okay." The second task, at this point, Ning Zhonggua suddenly chuckled. Chapter 86. Shangjing Mintai Affairs Investigation Center. Just from the name alone, this place seemed to be very powerful. But in fact, this was a so-called private detective company. The illegal kind. In 1993, the the Ministry of Public Security issued a notice prohibiting any unit or individual from opening various forms of civil affairs investigation, security affairs investigation, and other private detective agencies. The prohibited services included handling civil and economic disputes, debt recovery, security and technical consulting, investigations involving personal privacy, and so on. In 2002, the State Administration for Industry and Commerce Trademark Office adjusted the scope of trademark registration. The original 42 categories of goods and services were expanded to 45 categories. Among them, the new permitted registration categories included the provision of private bodyguards, detective companies, and security services such as search and investigation. Therefore, many detective companies even had a formal registered trademark of private detective. However, a strange thing happened. The State Administration for Industry and Commerce allowed the registration of trademarks, but it did not mean that the ban on private detective had been lifted. It was precisely because of this that private detective was still an illegal industry. The reason why the Ministry of Public Security prohibited it was mainly because private detective investigations were likely to touch on other people's privacy. Moreover, the evidence and materials provided by private detectives were not credible, and there was even the possibility of falsification. The state prohibited it, but the consumer market had a huge demand. Therefore, in recent years, there were more and more private detective companies with names such as consulting companies, public affairs investigation centers, and public affairs investigation centers. These companies that called themselves public affairs investigation agencies had a wide range of services, including search, emotional loyalty investigation, child behavior monitoring, recovery of large debts, whereabouts investigation, credit investigation, intellectual property investigation, as well as anti-counterfeiting and protection of rights, economic intelligence investigation, and so on. If private detectives wanted to complete their business, they could only use methods such as tracking, stalking, and candid photography to obtain the corresponding evidence. However, this kind of evidence collection method would inevitably seriously infringe on the privacy of the investigated person, and may even endanger the normal production and living order of other people, causing innocent victims. Therefore, it was prohibited by law. Article 42 of the Public Security Administration Punishment Law clearly stated that peeping, candid photography, eavesdropping, and spreading other people's privacy would be detained for not more than 5 days or fined not more than 500 yuan. If the circumstances were serious, the detention would be more than 5 days but less than 10 days, and a fine of not more than 500 yuan could be imposed. It was precisely because of the fear of public security agencies that many detective companies were secretive about their business. The company's address and contact information were often changed, and it was difficult to find. Naturally, it was very mysterious. As one of the leading private detectives in Shangjing, Feng Mintai was not as low-key as the average person. He had his professional dignity and was determined to be the spokesperson for the private detective industry. Therefore, after he became famous, Feng Mintai moved his company to a 5A grade office building and swore that he would never be like a rat in the gutter, hiding all day long. Of course, his company's main business was consulting, not private investigation. On this day, Feng Mintai welcomed a group of strange customers. A man who looked to be less than 30 years old was holding a 4 or 5-year-old little girl in his arms. The little girl was holding a black kitten in her arms. Feng Mintai originally thought that it was some kind of custody dispute, so he didn't bother and just sent someone to receive them. However, less than half a minute after the receptionist left, he scrambled over, saying that it was a big client and that he needed to attend to him personally. Feng Mintai had not personally received a customer for many years. After all, he was now a successful person with a certain social status. If he wanted to receive them personally, they had to be well-known figures in the legal world or leaders of public security organs. However, since the client had requested it, there was no harm in meeting him. However, Feng Mintai walked into the reception room calmly and sat opposite the man with a strong aura. The man's first sentence immediately scared him so much that he couldn't help but stand up. 10 million to help me find a person. If you really can't find him, it's okay. As long as you can provide me with useful clues, a clue for 1 million, how about that? 10 million to find a person. Even if he couldn't find the person, as long as he could provide clues, a clue was worth $1 million. Was this a police warrant? Feng Mintai had been in the business for so many years, but he had never seen such a big client. How was this a client? This was AF * King God of Wealth. How much did he earn per month to support an employee? The cost of living in Shangjing was not low. Feng Mintai offered the basic employees a basic salary of 4,000. If there was business, he would receive a commission based on the business unit price. Because of the special nature of the work, the employees would receive a living allowance of 200 yuan per day during the performance of the business. Even so, taking everything into account, how much was an employee's monthly salary? 50 million. Feng Mintai could immediately pull out a reinforced company of people to serve the god of wealth in front of him. Moreover, their industry was different from other industries. The industry had frequent exchanges, and there was no competition among the same industry. Similar to the business of finding people, when he received a commission, his colleagues from all over the country would take the initiative to disclose relevant clues to him. Then, he would distribute the information to his colleagues. Wasn't it difficult to find a person who owed money and ran away, hiding in a small county town? But didn't they also catch one accurately? Finding people was too easy. Therefore, even with Feng Mintai's current self-cultivation, he was so excited that he almost jumped up. Their industry usually required a deposit of 20%. However, because the contract amount was too large, Feng Mintai only symbolically asked for a deposit of 100,000 yuan. Then, he patted his chest and promised that he could definitely find this person. The god of wealth seemed to be very satisfied with Feng Mintai's professionalism. After listening to his bragging, he decisively paid the deposit, then carried the child and prepared to leave. Seeing this, Feng Mintai immediately called for 2 lackeys. The 3 of them escorted the god of wealth all the way downstairs. Then, they nodded and bowed as they respectfully sent the god of wealth off. After the god of wealth left, one of the lackeys asked with a little doubt, "Boss, who is that? Didn't you say that we have to pay attention to style now? Why do I feel that our behavior just now was very degrading?" Hearing this, Feng Mintai jumped up and slapped him on the back of the head. Then, he shouted loudly, "Degrading, degrading, what else do you know other than cutting people? That's the god of wealth, my grandpa, and also your grandpa. Do you understand? Learn from me, all of you. Let's go up and have a meeting. Call those guys back. Let's get to work." After explaining the task to Feng Mintai, Shi took the little girl straight to Tiananmen, ready to play in Shangjing. What he didn't know was, just as he was looking for the help of a private detective. In Zhonghai, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei also took action. 2 big networks were launched from 2 super first-tier cities in Huaxia at the same time. They were bound to find that person for him. Brother, don't rush me. The big plot is about to unfold. It's not like the previous small plot. Let me adjust the plot properly. After all, quality is more important than quantity. Chapter 87. As the capital of a country, there were too many tourist attractions in Shangjing. After all, this place used to be where the emperor lived. Not to mention the famous 3 mountains and 5 gardens, the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square. For example, Prince Gong's palace, half of the history of the Qing dynasty, was not as famous as the old Summer Palace, but it was still worth a visit. Because it was the only Qing dynasty palace open to the public in Huaxia, it could let the people know what the so-called palace was like. In addition to this series of ancient cultural buildings, the various exhibition halls in Shangjing were also attractions. For example, the Huaxia Science and Technology Museum, the National Museum, the Military Museum, the Capital Museum, the Huaxia Art Museum, and so on. In addition, modern business districts such as Wangfujing, Sanlitun, and the Financial Street also had their unique flavor. Even Tsinghua University and Peking University were popular tourist attractions. Humanities, nature, excursions, shopping, leisure, and vacations, Shangjing was almost everywhere. This was also the biggest difference between Shangjing and Zhonghai. After all, Zhonghai was a product of the times, so it never had the unique heritage of Shangjing. With money in his pocket, Chen Shi naturally became extravagant. So after checking on the internet, he decisively rented a Passat and prepared to take the little fellow to have a good time in Shangjing. After getting the car, Chen Shi found that the USB flash drive in the car was full of electronic music, so the first thing he did was to go to the bookstore and buy the little fellow a children's song. Then, the father and daughter sang while driving to Tiananmen Square. I love Tiananmen Square in Shangjing. The sun rises on Tiananmen Square. This was the first time Chen Shi drove after returning to Earth. The little fellow sat in the back seat and rolled over, very excited. After a while, the little fellow was a little dissatisfied because her father was not by her side. So she stood in the back seat and wanted to climb from the armrest to the front passenger seat. Chen Shi noticed her movements and quickly reached out his right hand to block her way. Then he said earnestly, "Good girl, sit in the back. Children can't sit in the front, or the police will take you away." The little fellow was so excited that she couldn't care less. She giggled and hugged Chen Shi's arm, wanting to roll to the front passenger seat. It couldn't be helped, Chen Shi couldn't drag her back to the back like a chicken, so she could only let her do whatever she wanted in the car. "Listen to me. Children really can't sit in the front. If you are seen by the police, then our car will be towed away by the police, and then Dad will go to jail. If Dad goes to jail, who will take care of you?" Hearing this, the little guy, who was originally standing in the passenger seat, immediately withered like an eggplant that had been hit by frost. She looked out of the window and snorted unhappily. Then, she crawled back to the back seat. "Good girl. Let's go. Daddy will take you to see Tiananmen." In the small courtyard, the white-clothed woman and the yellow-clothed woman named Xiao Qing were playing chess in the pavilion. On the black and white chessboard, the white-clothed woman held the white chess pieces while the yellow-clothed woman held the black chess pieces. The game was in a stalemate. Under the constant pressure of the white chess pieces, the black chess pieces gradually lost their composure. The territory that they worked so hard to occupy was slowly nibbled away by the white chess pieces. Seeing that she was at a disadvantage, the yellow-clothed woman was still smiling. It was as if she didn't put all her attention on the chessboard. It was the white-clothed woman's turn to make her move. She gently picked up a chess piece with her index and middle finger. Just as she was about to make her move, she suddenly heard the yellow-clothed woman's ingying laugh. "Sister, he is still looking for you. According to the current progress, I think he will get news about you soon." Hearing this, the white-clothed woman suddenly felt as if she was struck by lightning. In her excitement, she couldn't help but loosen her fingers and the white chess piece in her hand fell on the chessboard. Although she quickly recovered, her forced calm appearance couldn't escape the yellow-clothed woman's eyes. Life was like a game of chess. There was no regret when one made a move. Since she had made her choice, she had to stick to it. The yellow-clothed woman smiled. "You and I are sisters. We have been the closest since we were young. If you have something on your mind, I can guess it even if you don't say it. Why hide it from me?" As she spoke, the yellow-clothed woman picked up a black chess piece. Then, the black chess piece was placed at the position where the white-clothed woman wanted to place her chess piece. It was because of the placement of this black chess piece that the situation instantly turned around. The black chess piece that was originally in a desperate situation was instantly revived by her. The black chess piece was about to fly away, and the white chess piece was already in a desperate situation. The white-clothed woman stared at the chessboard in a daze. After sighing softly, she shook her head. Then, she took out 2 white chess pieces and placed them at the bottom right corner of the chessboard. She admitted defeat. Seeing that the white-clothed woman admitted defeat, the yellow-clothed woman smiled and was about to say something. However, at this moment, the white-clothed woman spoke first. "Hua Qin, you really don't have to compete with me. Because I didn't arrange it, and it's not what I wanted. I know you have resentment, but please don't blame me for it, okay?" The white-clothed woman said very pleadingly. The yellow-clothed woman was stunned for a moment, and her expression changed slightly. She thought for a moment, then forced a smile and said, "Sister, what are you talking about? Why don't I understand?" Hearing this, the white-clothed woman could only sigh deeply. Then, she looked at the yellow-clothed woman and said seriously, "Hua Qing, if you really treat me as your sister, then don't compete with me anymore, okay? After all, you're the person closest to me. Why do you always have to compete with me? That's not what I want, it's really not what I want." As she spoke, the woman in white turned her head to look outside the pavilion and muttered to herself towards the sky. The yellow-clothed woman was silent for a long time. A gust of wind blew in the small courtyard, carrying the fallen leaves at the end of September and making a rustling sound on the ground. Suddenly, the yellow-clothed woman chanted softly, "100 gods descend, the heavenly gate opens." After hearing the yellow-clothed woman's chant, the white-clothed woman was stunned. Then, she could no longer suppress the emotions in her heart. 2 streams of hot tears rolled down her cheeks. Yes, once the heavenly gate opens, the mortal world ends. As she cried, she took off the necklace on her neck. After looking at it affectionately, the white-clothed woman handed the necklace to the yellow-clothed woman and pleaded, "Hua Qing, can you do me a favor?" The yellow-clothed woman looked at her with a complicated expression, then shook her head. "No, I can't help you." With that, she flicked her sleeves, stood up, and walked out of the pavilion. The white-clothed woman stared blankly as she flicked her sleeves and left. Her face was full of despair. Creak. After a soft sound, the door opened. The yellow-clothed woman did not leave immediately. She hesitated for a moment, then suddenly turned her head and said to the white-clothed woman in the pavilion, "If you're willing to give me that necklace, I won't mind." Hearing this, the white-clothed woman's tears turned into a smile. That smile was like a flower after the rain. It was so sweet that it could make everything in the world pale in comparison. If Qin Shi was here, he would realize that this necklace was exactly the same as the one he gave to Yingying. Tiffany, and series. It was an entry-level design with the meaning of not forgetting one's original intentions. It only cost 1,450 yuan, and the receipt was still in their bedside table. This was also the only necklace that Qin Shi gave her. "Thank you, brother, Katatsumuri, for building 1,000 stories and being promoted to a guardian. Thank you, Mr. Xia Zhongyu, for the 10,000 yuan reward." Chapter 88. Ming Shu Si Tianji recorded, in the 5th month of the 3rd year of Longqing, the sky split in the northwest of Jiangzhou. Song Dynasty, Taiping Imperial Records 874 recorded, Tian sky split into 2 thunder-like sounds. It was when the king of Changsha was ordered by the emperor to reject Wang Ying, and the king of Hejin ordered the chaos. In the 8th month of the 2nd year of Tian, the sky split into 2 without clouds and thunder. Southern History, Liang Benji recorded, in the 1st month of the 2nd year of Liang Taiqing, the sky split in the northwest. It was 10 feet long and 20 feet wide. The light was like lightning, and the sound was like thunder. Tang Dynasty, Astronomical Records recorded, in the 12th month of the 13th year of Baoda, the sky split in the northeast. It was 12 feet long. Qing Dynasty, SX County Annals, Geographical Records, Fortune and Fortune recorded, in the 1st month of the 1st year of Jingda, the sky split in the north. The red light was 20 feet wide and 10 feet long. It disappeared in a flash. Qing Dynasty, Chongqing County Annals, Volume 14 recorded, in the 4th month of the 22nd year of Jiajing, the sky split in the night of the 2nd day. Li County Annals, complete. Fortune and Fortune recorded, on the 10th day of the 4th month of the 35th year of King Qianlong, the sky split in the 9th month. The yellow light shone brightly, and something as big as a bowl fell to the ground. Qing Dynasty, HD County Annals, Fortune and Fortune recorded, in the 6th year of Guangxu, on the 3rd day of the 2nd month, there was no disaster. The sound was like thunder, and the sky split in the southeast corner. The light was like lightning, more than 10 feet long, and it disappeared after a while. These were all records in official documents and official histories. They recorded a strange phenomenon, commonly known as the opening of the heavenly gate. In some folklore, the heavenly gate represented the southern heavenly gate of the heavenly court. When the heavenly gate was opened, some people who had achieved success in cultivation could ascend and become immortals. For some reason, as human society progressed, the number of times the heavenly gate was opened became less and less. Therefore, there were almost no relevant reports. If one wanted to understand, they could only find it in various history books. If one had to explain it from a scientific point of view, the opening of the heavenly gate was more like a projection due to the changes in the Earth's magnetic field. It might be more complicated than a mirage, but it was still just an illusion projection. But if one explained it this way, there would be a problem. If the heavenly gate was a projection, where was the actual body? Chen Shi took Nian around Shangjing City for 3 days. Every time he came to a crowded place, Chen Shi would deliberately stop and carefully scan every face that came and went. Although Chen Shi had lost his divine sense, his 5 senses were still far superior to ordinary people, so even if it was just a face-to-face encounter, he could still accurately remember the appearance of that person. While Chen Shi was strolling around Shangjing with the little fellow in his arms, trying his luck, Su Wei, on the other hand, used a method similar to hunger marketing to inflate the price of the pills higher and higher. Because Ning Zhongguo's first batch of medicinal pills paved the way, the 10 patients who had already taken the medicinal pills and whose physical condition had improved greatly all spread the news. Under the effect of 1 to 10, 10 to 100, the news instantly spread to the ears of the rich and powerful all over the country. Everyone began to inquire about the origin of this medicinal pill. 50 years of age is not considered a natural lifespan. The living conditions of modern people are getting better and better, and their lifespans are getting longer and longer, so many people are still in good health even if they are 50 years old. However, some middle-aged and elderly people with weaker physiques will gradually suffer from various diseases because of the decline of their immune function. Only people who have been tortured by illness will know how strong it is to be able to live optimistically while being tortured by pain every day. Although Su Wei was a business tycoon, he was not proficient in marketing. Su Wei first looked for Chen Shi to buy medicine mainly because he was in the pharmaceutical industry, so he was so sensitive to medicinal pills and went straight to the door. But he didn't expect that after the first 10 medicinal pills of Ning Zhongguo were fermenting and brewing, when the news that he still had 10 pills in his hands spread, the entire Zhonghai went crazy. The more the news spread, the more amazing it became. So much so that several big shots in Shangjing personally called him when they heard the news, and Su Wei had to reluctantly give away 3 pills. This was modern society. Technological progress has constantly improved efficiency, and the rhythm of life is 10,000 times faster than in the Ming dynasty. How long would it take for a secret that was not a secret to spread throughout the country? Su Wei now had a deep understanding of this. This was King wonderful experience that was both painful and delightful. Chen Shi's medicinal pills were not omnipotent, but when one of the patients with terminal cancer took it, this medicine became popular. Although the illness was not cured, at least it was temporarily under control and would not continue to worsen. At the same time, it also significantly improved the patient's mental condition. What's more, this medicine really had a certain effect. It was completely enough to make people go crazy. As a result, the simplified version of the Peiyuan Dan that Chen Shi casually refined was actually crowned with a resounding name by others. Defying the heavens and changing fate, the king of hell is worried. Su Wei and Ning Zhongguo were 2 different types of people. But after all, he was also a successful businessman, so just by relying on his own businessman's intuition, he inadvertently took away the plate that Ning Zhongguo painstakingly set up. Su Wei originally thought that this medicine could only be sold for 30 to 50 million, but it was not until now that he truly understood the value of this medicinal pill. Su Wei didn't know whether Ning Zhongguo was angry or not. But he was angry now. It was 2:00 in the morning, but 2 strangers broke into his house. The appearance of these 2 people could be accurately described with one word: short and vigorous. They were not tall, about 1.7 meters, and their skin was a little brown because of long-term sun exposure. When they opened their mouths, they spoke a language that Su Wei had never heard before. Can you 2 change to a language that I can understand? Su Wei sat on the sofa in a bathrobe. He raised his hands high and spoke carefully while secretly looking at the bodyguard who was lying on the ground at the door. He didn't know whether he was dead or alive. "Give us the medicinal pill." Hearing this, one of them spoke awkwardly in Mandarin while strangling Su Wei's neck. He completely put on a posture that said he would kill him if he didn't give it to him. "What medicine?" Su Wei still wanted to play dumb, but as soon as he finished speaking, he regretted it. Because these two people obviously came prepared. When they heard that he was playing dumb, they immediately punched his lower abdomen. Bang! After that punch, Su Wei almost fainted because of the pain. The man pretended to hit him again, and Su Wei repeatedly begged for mercy. "Stop. Stop hitting me. I'll tell you the truth. I've already sold all the medicinal pills." As soon as he finished speaking, Su Wei's lower abdomen was heavily punched again. And after this punch, Su Wei immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Wait, Su Wei was nearly 50 years old. Wine, women, avarice, and temper had already destroyed his body, and he was reluctant to eat the precious medicinal pill, so after taking 2 punches, Su Wei obviously couldn't bear it. Chapter 89. A man's wealth is his own ruin. Chen Shi made a mistake. He didn't realize how important the pills he gave out would be in the eyes of ordinary people. The 2 men who broke into the Su family's house were actually Nanyang people. The one who caught Su Wei was called Bassoon, and the other was called Ruanchuntang. Nanyang's environment was different from Huaxia's. Because of the existence of the Golden Triangle, its complicated geography, diverse ethnic groups, and various intertwined interests, it was almost a hotbed of evil. It wasn't that they couldn't destroy it, but every time they wanted to, someone would obstruct them. Su Wei was a famous business tycoon in Zhonghai, so he more or less knew some secrets. For example, the International Wu Lian. The International Wu Lian's existence not only suppressed the martial arts world of Huaxia, but also played a protective role. So when these 2 Nanyang people swaggered into his house, Su Wei's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. National Day was just a few days away, and the 90th anniversary military parade was about to begin. It was also the time for Huaxia to officially display its national strength. At such a critical moment, people from the Nanyang martial arts world actually broke into his house. It had to be said that they were really skilled and daring. His life was in the hands of others. Su Wei wasn't stupid. If he still had the pills, he would have handed them over immediately. But unfortunately, he didn't have any left. Therefore, after careful consideration, Su Wei decided to divert the trouble. But the person he diverted, not Chen Shi, but Ning Zhonghua. It was now 2 in the morning. As soon as the sun rose, someone would naturally notice something strange in his house and call the police. Once the police and the Wu Lian noticed, these 2 Nanyang people would definitely not be able to escape. Even a cornered beast would put up a fight, let alone 2 people. Just in case, Su Wei decided to bring these 2 people to Ning Zhonggua's house first. This way, when they took hostages and prepared to escape, they wouldn't kidnap his family. It had to be said that Su Wei's calculations were very good. When the 2 Nanyang people heard that he was willing to tell them the source of the pills, they immediately took Su Wei and drove to Jin City. Before they left, they tied Su Wei's bodyguards and nannies together with ropes. Perhaps they didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so they didn't kill anyone. This also made Su Wei feel a lot more relieved. 3:00 in the morning. Jin City Villa. Ning Zhonghua was violently thrown off the bed and woke up. When he woke up, apart from seeing the 2 Nanyang people, he also saw Su Wei, who looked somewhat dispirited. When Bassoon ferociously asked about the whereabouts of the pills, Ning Zhonghua immediately guessed the cause and effect. However, he was much smarter than Su Wei. Therefore, Ning Zhonghua did not hesitate and immediately shouted, "I bought the pills, I can take you to the cellar." Su Wei clearly didn't want to expose Chen Shi and was afraid of offending Chen Shi, so he simply pushed him out to be the sucker. But Ning Zhonghua was not stupid. In just a few blinks of an eye, Ning Zhonghua understood that Su Wei must have used up all the pills. Otherwise, with his status, he wouldn't do such a stupid thing like risking his life for money. Since they didn't have any more pills, then in this world, there was only one person who had them. To be honest, if it wasn't for the urgent situation, Ning Zhongguo would definitely not betray Chen Shi. Unfortunately, there was no other way. He was a fish on the chopping board. His own life was the most important thing. Unfortunately, Chen Shi was now in Shangjing, so Ning Zhongguo could only silently pray that Chen Shi still had some pills in his house. The two Nanyang people were obviously confused by these two old foxes. Thus, they immediately began to communicate with each other. During this time, Bassoon's eyes were filled with ferocity, but he was stopped by Ruan Chuntang in time. They seemed to know that this trip couldn't be delayed for too long. Therefore, Bassoon calmed down very quickly. After kicking Su Wei and Ning Zhongguo in anger, he grabbed the two old foxes and walked out of the bedroom. When Ning Zhongguo passed by the living room, he saw Ning Qiudong, who was tied to a chair and groaning. Thus, he quietly gave her a look, telling her not to be afraid. Then, Ning Zhongguo drove the two Nanyang people and Su Wei to Kangju District. 4 a.m. in the morning. Kangju District, Block 5, Unit 1, Room 302. A group of people stood outside the iron gate. The dim corridor light allowed Bassoon to see the note on the iron gate. Gone on a long trip. There was a series of numbers at the end. He might have recognized these few simple Chinese characters, so he immediately tore off the piece of paper in a fit of anger. Are you guys messing with me? Because of the language barrier, he had nowhere to vent his anger. So when he awkwardly spat out a few inarticulate words, he immediately grabbed Ning Zhongguo by the neck and lifted him up with his right hand. Ruan Chuntang was obviously more reserved than Bassoon. When he saw that Bassoon was about to kill someone, he immediately grabbed Bassoon's arm and shook his head at him. Then, Ruan Chuntang stood in front of the iron gate and gently covered the keyhole with his palm. Click, a light sound was heard. The door was opened by him just like that. Ruan Chuntang broke in. When Bassoon saw this, he snorted loudly and put Ning Zhongguo down. Then, he pushed Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei into the house. After Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei entered the house, they stood aside obediently. Meanwhile, the two Nanyang people started to rummage through the cabinets. At the same time that Bassoon tore the note. Shangjing, Pear Garden. In a pitch-black room, Chen Shi, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately after, a sudden burst of intense murderous aura scared the big cat, who was sleeping, to the point that it jumped up in fright. Because he always had an unrealistic fantasy in his heart, Chen Shi had never set up a restriction in his house. He had always been looking forward to the day when Yingying would come back. However, he didn't expect that it wouldn't be Yingying who would come, but a thief. Chen Shi silently sensed the commotion from afar. When Bassoon tore the note from the fridge and the bedside table, he completely exploded. Chen Shi cast a meditation incantation on the little girl with a solemn expression. Then, he wrapped the little girl in a blanket and carried her to the courtyard. When the big cat saw that the situation wasn't right, it immediately jumped into Chen Shi's arms. Then, it stuck out its butt and tried its best to squeeze into the little girl's blanket. It poked its head out and looked around. It didn't know what Chen Shi was up to in the middle of the night. Just as it was feeling confused, Chen Shi let out a loud snort. Then, he carried them and soared into the sky. There was no sense of weightlessness or the sound of wind. The big cat peeked its head out and immediately started to meow in shock. The brightly lit city of Shangjing became smaller and smaller. In the blink of an eye, it gradually disappeared from its sight. Chen Shi was really enraged. Chapter 90. Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei stood in the living room as they helplessly watched Bassoon and Ruan Chuntang rummaging through Chen Shi's house. This was the first time they stepped into Chen Shi's house, but they didn't expect to enter in this way. The two of them looked at each other at the same time. Su Wei's eyes were a little helpless. Ning Zhongguo's eyes were filled with anger. It clearly had nothing to do with him, but this time, it was all because of Su Wei, that old bastard. Ning Zhonghua had a rough understanding of Chen Shi's personality. He usually looked like an easygoing person, but this kind of person usually had a fixed bottom line. As long as the bottom line wasn't touched, then everything could be discussed. But once someone touched the bottom line, this kind of person would be even more terrifying than a madman. Especially when this madman had some unimaginable abilities. Chen Shi's house wasn't big and didn't have any valuable furnishings. Some of the furniture in the house were even antiques that had been used for several years. Auntie Zhang's room had already been vacated, so the two Nanyang people focused on the master bedroom. Because it was 4:00 in the morning, they were afraid of waking up the neighbors, so they tried to control their movements to avoid making too much noise. The bed was turned over, no. The closet was turned over, no. The fridge was turned over, no. Thieves weren't as picky as the owner. They opened the drawers and threw things out crazily. Their destructive power was definitely far greater than a husky's. Ning Zhonghua looked at the messy room in front of him and frowned. At this point, he could only pray that the two Nanyang people could find the pill. As for Chen Shi's reaction. To be honest, Ning Zhonghua didn't dare to think that way, but he didn't have to think about it. Because Chen Shi arrived. Chen Shi walked into the room without warning and appeared in front of Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. The two tycoons of the business world were stunned, then they did the same thing at the same time. Which was, they rubbed their eyes with their hands. Perhaps because they were too confident in their abilities, Bassoon and Ruan Chuntang didn't tie them up. When Ning Zhonghua finished rubbing his eyes and saw Chen Shi standing in front of him, he was so excited that he couldn't even speak properly. Mr. Chen. You're back. Chen Shi looked at his love nest expressionlessly. This was his and Yingying's love nest. But now, his love nest was destroyed like this. It was a very complicated feeling. It was as if the last piece of pure land that one cherished the most in one's heart had been used as a public toilet, and one could casually defecate and urinate on it. Ning Zhonghua carefully looked at Chen Shi's face. Even when Qiu Tong told him to get lost, he didn't have this expression's face. All of a sudden, Ning Zhonghua felt that his entire body was covered with a cold sensation. It was as if a bone-piercing cold wind had suddenly blown over, so cold that goosebumps appeared all over his body. Chen Shi acted like he didn't hear Ning Zhonghua's words. However, Bassoon and Ruan Chuntang, who were looking for pills in the master bedroom, heard it. They immediately stopped what they were doing, got up, and walked out of the bedroom. Bassoon was stunned when he came out. Because he just realized that there was a strange young man in the room. The young man was hugging a blanket. There was a little girl sleeping soundly under the blanket, and a cat poking its head out. It was a very strange combination. Ruan Chuntang walked out of the room while Bassoon was in a daze. However, when he saw the young man, his reaction was completely different from Bassoon's. Without any hesitation, Ruan Chuntang's muscles tensed up. He was short in stature, but his muscles were as strong as a small mountain. He looked particularly fierce. There was a murderous aura. Strike first and gain the upper hand. As a result, Ruan Chuntang bent his legs and his whole body suddenly shot out like a cannonball, fiercely charging towards Chen Shi. Ning Zhonghua saw this and immediately warned nervously, "Mr. Chen, be careful. He might be." Unfortunately, Ruan Chuntang's movements were faster than Ning Zhonghua's mouth. Before Ning Zhonghua could finish, Ruan Chuntang was already in front of Chen Shi. However, what happened next made Ning Zhonghua's jaw drop. Ruan Chuntang was about 1 or 2 meters away from Chen Shi when his body suddenly stopped moving. Then, he fell to the ground for no reason. If one had to describe it, Ruan Chuntang looked like he had crashed into tempered glass. Ning Zhonghua was standing next to Chen Shi, so he saw the whole process clearly. So much so that he dared to pat his chest and guarantee that Chen Shi absolutely did not do anything. It was Ruan Chuntang who suddenly fell down inexplicably. After witnessing Ruan Chuntang's sudden collapse, Bassoon couldn't help but feel puzzled. However, he quickly came back to his senses. Something was wrong. Bassoon let out a roar and charged at Chen Shi. His movements were fast, and his momentum was even fiercer than Wan Chuantong's. However, he left as quickly as he came. Chen Shi waved his sleeves and bassoon flew backward at an even faster speed. After sending basin flying, Chen Shi seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly raised her hand to stop him. Bassoon, who was about to hit the wall, suddenly stopped in mid-air in an extremely strange posture that didn't conform to the laws of physics. Then, Chen Shi pressed his palm down. Bassoon's body flew back and heavily smashed into Wan Chuantong's body. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei were stunned. Both of them were over 100 years old. They had never seen such a strange scene. Su Wei was paralyzed on the spot. His legs gave way and he fell to the ground as if he had no bones. Ning Zhonghua's reaction was much better than Su Wei's. Perhaps it was because Ning Zhonghua had gone through the incident with the spirits that he could still muster up the courage to speak. Mr. Chen, however, Chen Shi acted as if he did not hear it at all. After putting down the two daring thieves, he hugged his blanket and sat on the sofa. Then, he looked at the big cat expressionlessly and asked, "Do cats eat meat too?" Hearing this, the big cat immediately meowed meekly. As it barked, it glanced at the two people on the ground with a look of disdain. Its appetite was now very picky. Whatever the little guy ate, it would eat. It was so arrogant. All right. Drag them out first. Drag them far away and don't let anyone discover them. Meow. The big cat let out an unhappy cry before reluctantly crawling out of the blanket. Then, its body expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye under Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei's terrified gazes. Duh. Monster. He watched as the kitten in front of him suddenly turned into a pure black adult leopard. This time, even Ning Zhonghua was scared stiff. This book will be published on November 1st. If nothing goes wrong, it will be published on January 1st. When I published the book, it was 1 chapter a day. When it was recommended, it changed to 2 chapters a day. Now, it's 200,000 words, so it'll be around 250,000 words by January 1st, 250,000 words. This was Chidian's normal standard, okay? Don't compare me to those fantasy leveling up novels. I'll write 1 chapter for each level, and 2 or 3 chapters for each battle. I can't compare, anyway. I'll try my best to write, because your urging is a form of recognition. I'll try my best. From now on, I won't play games anymore. Chapter 91. Demon. When Ning Zhonghua saw the big cat turn from a kitten into an adult leopard, he finally broke down. Chen Shi's living room wasn't very big to begin with, and the two people lying on the ground took up a lot of space. When the big cat turned back to its original form, its huge body would probably touch Ning Zhonghua even if it turned around. In fact, it wasn't that big before, but because it had eaten too many energy cultivation pills recently, and because it had finally mastered the Great Wilderness physical conditioning technique, its body size had increased by 1/3. Ning Zhonghua leaned against the wall, paralyzed. Because he was too scared, all the strength in his legs disappeared. This caused him to slowly slide to the ground, and his mouth unconsciously muttered the word demon. The big cat didn't seem to like being called a demon, so it immediately turned around and slowly moved its head closer to Ning Zhonghua. Perhaps it was because its body had grown larger, its vertical pupils looked particularly terrifying now. A cat's eyes were different from a human's. A small light source could cause their eyes to emit light, so the big cat's eyes constantly reflected a faint green light under the light. However, it was this pair of eyes that the little guy called emeralds that scared Ning Zhonghua so much that he was about to go crazy. Don't come over. He didn't look like a business tycoon anymore, he looked like a drowning person, crazily waving his legs and waving his hands. Even if he had to crawl away from the big cat. The big cat probably wanted to tease him, so it suddenly grinned, revealing its mouth full of sharp teeth. Just as Big Cat was slowly walking towards Ning Zhonghua with a grin on its face, Chen Shi finally spoke. That's enough, Big Cat, don't scare him anymore. What are you doing? Hurry up and do your work, it'll be troublesome if someone sees you in the morning. Hearing this, the big cat shook its head unhappily, then turned around and bit Ong's leg, dragging him outside. Chen Shi's words were like music to Ning Zhongguo's ears, and he immediately came back to his senses. Yes, Mr. Chen was still here. This cat or leopard? Anyway, it was Mr. Chen's pet, so it definitely wouldn't hurt him. After thinking through this point, Ning Zhongguo finally managed to calm down his mind. Then, he sat on the ground a little dejectedly, and looked at Chen Shi with a very complicated gaze. The room was a little quiet, except for the rustling sound of the big cat dragging people away. Chen Shi hugged the blanket, and looked at the little guys with his head, and finally calmed down. He couldn't help but reach out and pinch the little guy's cheeks, then suddenly asked, "Tell me, what happened today?" When Ning Zhongguo heard his question, he immediately got up from the ground, slightly bowed, and answered nervously, "Mr. Chen, it's like this." What he saw and heard today had completely shattered Ning Zhongguo's understanding of Chen Shi. Before, he only thought of Chen Shi as a hidden expert. But now, he completely thought of Chen Shi as a god. Ning Zhongguo knew Chen Shi's character, and knew that he didn't care about these things. However, Ning Zhongguo's words and expression revealed a kind of sincere respect from the bottom of his heart. Su Wei originally thought that Ning Zhongguo would say something bad about him at this time, but he didn't expect Ning Zhongguo to casually avoid it. Instead, he said that the two of them couldn't resist, so they had to bring the two Nanyang people here. Ning Zhongguo was very smart, so he didn't try to avoid it at all. He honestly confessed everything, then stood by the side with his hands by his side, quietly waiting for Chen Shi to deal with him. After listening to Ning Zhongguo's explanation, Chen Shi thought for a while, then frowned and asked, "So, everything that happened today was caused by those pills?" Su Wei wasn't familiar with Chen Shi, so he didn't dare to answer. He could only look at Ning Zhongguo. However, after hearing Chen Shi's question, Ning Zhongguo didn't answer. Instead, he lowered his head even more. The room was quiet again. However, Su Wei was so nervous that he was sweating. He didn't know how long he waited. Chen Shi finally sighed and said, "Forget it, you guys helped me a lot." Hearing this, Su Wei was overjoyed. The joy of surviving a calamity caused his body to tremble uncontrollably. However, Ning Zhongguo didn't show any signs of happiness. Because Chen Shi hadn't finished speaking yet. "I won't vent my anger on you guys, but I want to know, how are you going to deal with the aftermath? Here's the main point." Therefore, Ning Zhongguo immediately replied respectfully, "We will immediately release the news and announce to the public that the expert who refined the divine pill has passed away. As for your existence, I can guarantee that no one will know about it in the future." Chen Shi nodded and said impatiently, "That's it then, you can go back." "Thank you, Mr. Chen." The two thanked him and quickly walked out of the room. Just as they walked downstairs, they faintly heard the sound of a cat in the distance. Immediately after, there was a rustling sound in the garden. Ning Zhongguo took a closer look and realized that the cats in the yard had appeared out of nowhere and were running in the direction of the sound. These cats were very fast, and there were no street lights here, so they couldn't see very clearly. They could only vaguely see countless black shadows flashing by. Su Wei didn't dare to move. He was a little scared. However, at this time, Ning Zhongguo grabbed him and ran outside. "Let's go, it's too creepy here." The two ran out of Kongju community and stood under the street lights. Then, they looked back at the dark community with lingering fear. The experience of this night was too creepy. However, it was also because of the various strange methods that Chen Shi showed that night that made Ning Zhongguo feel very regretful. If he had known that Chen Shi had this kind of ability, he would never have brought the two Nanyang people here. Originally, his relationship with Chen Shi was very good. However, because of what happened today, Ning Zhongguo clearly felt that Chen Shi's attitude towards him had changed a little. They were lucky that he didn't kill them. After getting into the car, Ning Zhongguo thought about it carefully, then turned to look at Su Wei and said seriously, "Old Su, I can write off what happened in the past, but from now on, the two of us will have to work together. Su Wei was stunned. However, immediately after, he understood what Ning Zhonghua meant. Therefore, Su Wei gritted his teeth and said seriously to Ning Zhonghua, "Let's write off what happened, I'll work with you." The annoying guys were all gone. Chen Shi gently put the little guy on the sofa, then got up and began to clean up the room. Fortunately, the two Nanyang people were probably worried that they would wake up the neighbors if they made too much noise. Therefore, although the house was a little messy, the things were not damaged. Chapter 92. Chen Shi quietly cleaned up the house. There were all kinds of receipts in the drawer under the TV. Receipts for electricity, water, and gas were thrown all over the floor by the two bastards. There were a lot of receipts, some of which even began to turn yellow. Chen Shi picked up one of them and looked at it. He found that the payment date was 6 years ago. At that time, he hadn't left yet. Humans were nostalgic creatures. So even if these receipts were meaningless, Chen Shi still picked them up one by one, folded them, and put them back in the drawer. In fact, there was nothing valuable in his house. The only thing that was valuable was Chen Shi's memory. The master bedroom was even more messy. The clothes in the closet were thrown everywhere. Chen Shi picked up the clothes one by one and hung them up. In this pile of colorful clothes, except for his old clothes, there was only the little guy's clothes. As for Yingying's clothes, there was not a single one. After tidying up the closet, Chen Shi remade the bed on the floor. Then, he moved the bedside table that was moved aside by Basin back to its original position. When Chen Shi was tidying up the bedside table, he suddenly froze. Because he saw the receipt. Tiffany Company, Return to Tiffany series. It means to never forget one's original intention. Cost, 1,450 yuan. That was when he secretly bought it for Yingying on Valentine's Day. Chen Shi still remembered Yingying's expression when she received the necklace. After all, 1,450 yuan was enough for him to live on for 2 months. It was a speechless and happy expression. It was sweet. But although Yingying was very happy at the time, she repeatedly asked him not to buy such expensive gifts in the future. So from then on, he didn't buy any expensive gifts anymore. While recalling the past, Chen Shi picked up the box that was originally used to store the necklace from the bedside table. The box was empty. After thinking for a while, he put the receipt in and closed the drawer reluctantly. His house had almost been raided. When the two bastards were rummaging through the house, they also kicked up a lot of dust. Therefore, after Chen Shi tidied up the room, he took a broom and a mop and carefully cleaned every room. Then, he gently carried the little girl from the sofa to the bed. The blanket that covered the little guy was still from the hotel, but now it was obviously unceremoniously taken over by him. The big cat went out to work for a long time. Around dawn, it finally came back in through the window. At this time, the big cat had already shrunk to the size of a kitten. Therefore, as soon as it got home, it wanted to crawl into the little girl's bed. However, just as the big cat jumped onto the bed, Chen Shi suddenly kicked it back down. "Go take a shower." Meow. Hearing this, the big cat meowed angrily. But there was no other way. In this family, Nian was the boss, Chen Shi was the second, and it was the third. Therefore, after hearing Chen Shi's words, it had to shrug its head and reluctantly ran to the bathroom. This guy was so smart that it could even play with a touchscreen phone, let alone take a shower by itself. Therefore, after a while, there was the sound of running water in the bathroom. The next day, because of the effect of the meditation spell, the little guy slept very soundly. It was not until the sun shone on her but that she slowly woke up. The sunlight was so dazzling that she could not open her eyes, so after rubbing her eyes, she squinted her eyes, raised her small hands, and stretched her big body. "Papa. Papa." Calling Papa was always the first thing the little guy did when she woke up. Chen Shi came over with an iron spoon. After pinching her little face, he said with a smile, "Papa is cooking porridge for you." Wait a moment, it will be right away. After that, Chen-shi ran into the kitchen again like a gust of wind. The porridge was inseparable from the fire. Only by adding water and rice could the porridge be achieved in one go. Chen-shi's cooking skills were now comparable to that of a hotel chef, so he also paid a lot of attention when cooking. He kept stirring with a spoon until the porridge in the casserole became a little crispy. Then he nodded with satisfaction. Then, he turned off the fire, put down the iron spoon, ran back to the bedroom, and walked to the bathroom with the little guy in his arms. How was it? Did you sleep well last night? Yes, I slept so much. The little guy rubbed her eyes again, yawned, and then stood on the ground obediently, waiting for Chen-shi to wash her face. Chen-shi took the towel and was about to wipe her face. The little guy suddenly came to her senses. She was stunned for a moment, and then she ran out of the bathroom. Running to the living room, the little guy stared blankly at everything familiar in front of her. After Chen-shi covered her face with a hot towel, she pouted and asked, "Papa, why are we at home?" "Oh, something happened at home yesterday, so Papa brought you back." "Are we still going to play at the Great Wall?" After washing her face, the little guy's face was red and very cute. So, Chen-shi kissed her on the face, and then asked with a smile, "Do you still want to see the Great Wall?" "If you want to go, Papa will take you." The little guy pouted and thought for a while. Suddenly, she giggled. "I'm not going, I want to watch cartoons." After that, she shrank her body, got out of Chen-shi's arms, and then trotted to turn on the TV. She had been wandering around in Shangjing for a few days, so she didn't watch many cartoons. Compared with cartoons, the Great Wall was obviously less attractive. Big cat, big cat. "Come on, let's watch cartoons." After turning on the TV, the little guy stood on the sofa and jumped, chirping non-stop. Seeing this, Chen-shi smiled and didn't care about her. There were many ways parents could educate their children. Chen-shi chose the most relaxed, non-controlling education method. This kind of education method had advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, it could let the child's personality develop freely, fully show the child's nature, and open up the limitations of thinking. On the negative side, it was easy for the child to lose self-control, lack of self-control, and lack of sense of responsibility. There were advantages and disadvantages to each education method, but the one that really played a decisive role was obviously the image that parents imperceptibly established in their children's daily lives. That was also the benchmark for the child's future growth. As the saying goes, dragons give birth to dragons, phoenixes give birth to phoenixes, and mice give birth to sons that know how to dig holes. Learning to guide the right way, not to control too much, was what every parent should do. After serving the little guy breakfast, Chen-shi cleaned up the kitchen and watched cartoons with her. But after looking at it for a while, his phone suddenly rang. The caller was Feng Mintai. "Hello? Mr. Feng?" "Mr. Chen, good news." "Great news. We finally found a useful clue." As soon as the call was connected, Feng Mintai's voice came through. Looking at his attitude, he was probably even more excited than Chen-shi. After Chen-shi heard his words, the first reaction in his mind was, sure enough, money was omnipotent. This chapter's background music, Winter's Secret by Zhou Chuanxiong. Because it didn't match, it wasn't played. Chapter 93. Feng Mintai's voice was very exaggerated. He seemed to be very excited. However, after thinking about it for a moment, it was actually possible to understand why he was so excited. A clue was worth 1,000,000, but it only took him 3 days to find the first clue. 1,000,000 in 3 days. 330,000 in a day. 14,000 in an hour. Up to 230 yuan in a second. In Feng Mintai's entire life, he had never accepted such a lucrative business deal. This was almost like robbing a bank. However, everything was based on the authenticity of the information. Therefore, when Chen-shi picked up the phone, he immediately began to talk. We followed the information you provided and investigated from Zhonghai University all the way to Beijing. After 2 days of searching day and night, we still couldn't find any information about Qin Ruoying. Speaking of this, Feng Mintai deliberately paused and then bragged, originally, this project was at a dead end, but at such a critical moment, I had a flash of inspiration and thought of another entry point. Qin Shi held the phone and waited for a while. Feng Mintai paused again. At this time, Qin Shi's curiosity was completely aroused by him. Seeing that he wanted to keep him in suspense, he immediately couldn't help but scold him, cut the crap, get to the point. Yes, boss, you're right, Feng Mintai laughed a few times. After a light cough, he looked at the information in his hand and continued, since we can't find Qin Ruoying, why should we focus on her? Therefore, I changed my train of thought and shifted my focus away from Qin Ruoying and placed it on someone else. At this point, Qin Shi seemed to have figured out what he found. Therefore, he couldn't wait to ask, did you find Aunt Zhang's information? Yes, Aunt Zhang is actually the most critical breakthrough of this project. According to the information you provided, we took her photo and searched all the way. Finally, I found a clue that had been dusty for a long time in the database of an employment agency. Hey, where did the information go? Wait a minute, I'll find it for you. Speaking of this, Feng Mintai's occupational disease acted up again. He pretended to dawdle for a long time and deliberately made a rummaging sound. He was unwilling to take out the document, which made Qin Shi's heart itch. Hey, where did you go? I remember I put it here. Feng Mintai continued to mutter on the other end of the phone. Qin Shi waited for a while before he suddenly reacted. This guy was playing the fool and asking for money. Hence, Qin Shi immediately frowned and scolded angrily, hurry up and tell me. I'll give you 1 million for each clue, and I won't give you a single cent. Ah, I found it. So it's here. Thank you, boss. Feng Mintai smiled proudly. Seeing that Qin Shi was about to fly into a rage, he quickly reported, Aunt Zhang's original name was Zhang Chuanju. She's 56 years old now. 20 years ago, she worked at Shangjing's Rainbow Employment Agency. Because the employer was unwilling to sign a contract with the agency only took the intermediary fee and didn't sign the contract on her behalf. Her labor contract was signed directly with the employer, and it was a 10-year contract. The copy of the contract is with me now. Hearing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He had been hiding under the light all this time. Yingying's information wasn't easy to find, but Aunt Zhang's information was easy to find. Because she had promised Yingying, Aunt Zhang had been unwilling to tell him anything about Yingying's family. Qin Shi respected her a lot. Seeing that she was unwilling to talk about it, Qin Shi didn't continue to ask, let alone force her to talk. So much so that Qin Shi didn't even think of investigating Aunt Zhang and finding clues about Yingying from her. Feng Mintai was indeed an expert in this field. In just 3 days, he actually managed to find some useful clues. Therefore, Qin Shi immediately asked, their previous address should be on the contract, right? Where is it? There should be. Please wait a moment, I'll read it to you right away. After saying that, Feng Mintai coughed lightly again, and then dilly-dallied on the other end of the line. Who knew what he was doing? Obviously, his old habit was acting up again. Qin Shi was so angry that his eyelids twitched. He gritted his teeth and warned him word by word, read. Here. Me. Listen. If Feng Mintai was in front of him now, Qin Shi really couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't strangle him to death. Okay, boss, I'll read it to you now. Listen carefully. Party A, Qin Yongyan, Party B, Zhang Chuanju. According to the Contract Law of the People's Republic of Huaxia, and other relevant laws and regulations, Party A and Party B, based on the principle of equality and voluntariness, have reached the following agreement regarding the provision of nanny services by Party B for Party A. Feng Mintai read the contract from the beginning to the end. However, when Qin Shi heard the first sentence, he was stunned for a moment, and then muttered to himself, Qin Yongyan? It should be a man. Yingying was only a few years old at that time. Aunt Zhang must have taken care of her, So the man who signed the contract with Aunt Zhang, maybe he was Yingying's father? Father-in-law? This was a serious matter, so Qinshi immediately engraved this name in his mind. This contract is made in triplicate. Party A, Party B, and the guarantor each hold one copy. It will take effect from the date of signing. Party A's signature, Qin Yongyan, Party B's signature, Zhang Chuanju. Boss, I've finished reading. Hey, there's no address on this contract. Feng Mintai didn't pretend to be crazy this time. When he found that there was no address on the contract, he immediately became nervous. The reason why he dilly-dallied just now was that he was afraid that Qinshi would think that this matter was too easy and wouldn't be willing to pay a sky-high price of 1 million for a clue. Feng Mintai could become the largest private detective studio in Shangjing. At the very least, he still had professional ethics. So when he found that there was no address on the contract, he immediately panicked. Are you kidding me? How can there be a clue without an address? This was 20 years ago. Even if he found the person in charge of the employment agency, he probably couldn't remember the address at that time. After all this time, it was a waste of effort. Qinshi was completely enraged by him. When he was about to lose his temper, Feng Mintai's joyful voice came from the other end of the phone again. Boss. I found it. There's an address. It's in the additional terms. Read it for me. Dongming Alley, Shihai Sihiyuan. F***CK, this place is full of Sihiyuan. Any one of them would cost 100 million. You send someone to confirm the address now. I'll be there soon. Speaking of this, Qinshi suddenly thought of something. After looking down at the little fellow in his arms, he quickly changed his mind and said, No, I'm in Zhonghai now. I'll buy the next flight. Wait for me there. Okay, boss, I'll arrange for someone to go there first. After hanging up the phone, before Qinshi could speak, the little fellow had already pouted and asked, Papa, where are we going? Are we going to take a plane again? I don't want to take a plane. I want to watch cartoons. In her mind, wherever Qinshi wanted to go, she would naturally follow. But now that she had only watched half of the cartoons, of course, she didn't want to go anywhere. Qinshi pinched her little face and said with a smile, Daddy will take you to Mommy's hometown, okay? Mommy's hometown? The little fellow looked at Qinshi with her big eyes, as if she didn't understand what he meant. After being stunned for a moment, she suddenly jumped up excitedly and shouted excitedly, Okay. Papa, take me there. Take me there. I want to see Mommy. Every day, they say that I'm missing chapters. Every chapter, they say that I'm missing chapters. Does it mean that the plot is very tight? I didn't make any mistakes. Right. Right. Chapter 94. There were 6 seas in Shangjing City. The first 3 seas were Beihai and Zhonghai. Beihai was open to the public as a park. However, Zhonghai and Nanhai had armed police standing guard, strictly prohibiting tourists from entering because they were collectively known as Zhonghai. The last 3 seas were Qianhai, Hohai, and Shihai, collectively known as Shikahai. Although it was called a sea, it was actually just a few lakes. The reason why it was called a sea was actually a continuation of the Yuan dynasty's name. MGZ lived in the highlands, and water sources were extremely scarce. After the capital was built in Shangjing, in order to show the preciousness of the water sources in the capital, they used the sea to describe the pools. To put it bluntly, they had never seen a real sea. The Shihai at the top of Shikahai was also called the Jishui Pool. There was a saying that there would be no Yuandu without the Jishui Pool. Without the Yuandu, there would be no Shangjing city structure today. The Jishui Pool was the end of the Jinghang Grand Canal. It was once the main port of Shangjing city's transportation, and it was also the Royal Elephant Pool. Since the Yuan dynasty, elephants from Siam and Myanmar were used as transportation tools and palace guards of honor. On the days of summer, trainers would lead elephants to the Jishui Pool to bathe, so it was also called the Elephant Pool. Today, Shangjing had become a first-tier city in the world. However, the original folk culture was still preserved here. The traditional folk architecture with the characteristics of the old city was in sharp contrast to the high-rise buildings outside the Third Ring Road. Dongming Alley was located next to the Shihai. Opening the door, one could see the Shikahai not far away. In summer, the waves were as flat as a mirror, the weeping willows were swaying, and the lotus flowers were in full bloom. In winter, the Shikahai would become a natural skating rink. The scenery was beautiful and the scenery was beautiful. If one had to describe it more intuitively, one could only mention the housing price. The housing price here, 250,000 yuan per square meter. She walked into Dongming Alley with the little fellow in his arms. Although the little fellow had played in Shangjing for a few days, She had taken her to some major scenic spots. When had she ever been to such an old street with a very folk flavor? So when she saw the rows of high walls and courtyards, she immediately felt very novel and chattered non-stop. Feng Mintai walked in front to lead the way. The alley was not deep. After walking for a few hundred meters, he stopped and pointed at the big house next to him. With a flattering smile on his face, he said, "Boss, this is the one. Wide and bright door, it's a big house." The so-called Sihiyuan was a courtyard with a house in each direction, surrounding the courtyard in the middle. Because there was only one door in the courtyard, the style of the door was very particular, so one could tell the identity of the family just by looking at the door. There were 6 main types of gates: Guangliang Gate, Golden Pillar Gate, Barbarian Gate, Rui Gate, Narrow Gate, and Walled Gate. Guangliang Gate, also known as Guangliang Gate, was a gate used by officials of a certain rank. The size of the Guangliang Gate was larger than the houses of ordinary families. Therefore, it was very prominent among the houses along the street. She hesitated in front of the gate. However, when he carefully observed his surroundings, he was shocked. His heart slowly sank. The lock on the knocker showed that no one was at home, otherwise such a door would have been locked from the inside with a wooden bolt. Most importantly, he didn't hear any movement in the courtyard at all. Phew, she let out a long breath of turbid air, and then carried the little fellow directly to the gate. Although he knew that there was no one in the house, he still gently held the door knocker and knocked. Bang, 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 with every knock, Shi's heart would beat with it. However, after knocking for a while, there was still no movement behind the door. She had no choice but to gently touch the iron lock on the door knocker and use his vital essence to open the iron lock. After putting the iron lock in a corner, she carried the little fellow with one hand and pushed the door open with the other. Perhaps because she knew that this was her mother's hometown, the little fellow's little face was very tense, and her hands were tightly wrapped around Shi's neck. The door opened. The first thing that came into view was a screen wall. The screen wall was very ordinary, but there was a big Qin character engraved in the middle. Qin family. This was a 2-door Sihiyuan. The gate of the house was in the southeast corner, and after entering the gate, there was the front yard. There was a gate in the middle of the front yard, also known as the Chuehua Gate. The Chuehua Gate was the boundary between the front yard and the inner yard. The front yard was used to receive guests, and outsiders were generally not allowed to enter the inner yard at will. As the saying went, if you don't go out of the main gate, you won't go out of the second gate. The second gate here referred to the Chuehua Gate. Since he had already broken in, Shi naturally wouldn't be polite, so he carried the child and walked to the inner yard. After passing through the Chuehua Gate, Shi saw 2 locust trees planted on the left and right sides of the inner yard. It was autumn in October, and the 2 locust trees were luxuriant with branches and leaves, opening a good place for the owner to enjoy the cool in the yard. The sun was very warm after 5:00 in the afternoon, and the yard was full of golden light, which made people feel comfortable. The yard was very clean, and there were not many fallen leaves on the ground. It didn't look like it had been empty for a long time. She carried the little fellow through the yard and stood directly outside the door of the main room. This was not a bedroom, but the main hall of the Sihiyuan, which was equivalent to the current living room. She gently pushed the door and entered. The first thing he saw was a large red sandalwood table with carved dragons, and 2 rows of chairs were placed in front of the table. There were a total of 8 chairs, 4 on each side. There was a couplet hanging above the table. It was not appropriate to call it a couplet, because what was written on it was clearly a poem. The heavenly gate is broken, and the Chu River opens, and the blue water flows to the east. It was from Li Bai's, looking at the heavenly gate mountain. Chen Shi carefully patrolled around the room, and Feng Mintai also jumped in. Like a bootlicker with a mustache, he followed behind Chen Shi and looked around. "Boss, who are you looking for? The furnishings in this house look extraordinary. It must have been a rich family in the past." Chen Shi didn't pay attention to him. Instead, she carefully patrolled around the room. When he walked to the large red sandalwood table, Chen Shi suddenly froze. There was a necklace on the table. It was the one he gave to Ying. Chen Shi held the little fellow in his right hand, and gently picked up the necklace from the table with his left hand. He carefully rubbed the pendant of the necklace. At this time, the little fellow suddenly reached out and grabbed the other end of the necklace, and then looked up and asked, "Papa, what is this?" "This is Mom's necklace. I gave it to her." Hearing this, the little fellow pouted and thought for a moment. Then, she pulled the necklace from Chen Shi's hand and hid it in her arms like a treasure. "Mama's is mine. I want this." "Well, it's yours from now on. Come on, Dad will put it on for you." Chen Shi gently put the little fellow on the ground, and then took the necklace from her hand. The little fellow looked up happily, as happy as when the kindergarten teacher put the little red flower on her. Chen Shi squatted on the ground, ready to put the necklace on her. At this time, the little fellow saw the strange look on Chen Shi's face. Chapter 95. In the main hall. The father and daughter looked at each other in front of the large red sandalwood table. Chen Shi squatted down and was about to put the necklace on her, but the little fellow looked at Chen Shi blankly. Suddenly, with a frightened expression, she said timidly, "Papa, don't cry. I don't want it. I don't want the necklace." The little fellow reached out her small hand and wiped away Chen Shi's tears. Then she threw herself into Chen Shi's arms. She hugged Chen Shi tightly and murmured, "I don't want Mommy's necklace." "Papa, don't cry." As she spoke, the little fellow suddenly burst into tears. "Papa, I don't want the necklace. Don't cry. I don't want the necklace." She looked very aggrieved. Chen Shi, on the other hand, was stunned by her sudden emotional outburst. When he saw the necklace just now, he naturally thought of something in the past. Seeing the necklace reminded him of her, so he couldn't help crying. But he didn't expect that he would scare the child because of this. Sin. It was like children in kindergarten fighting for things. He guessed that the little fellow saw her father crying and thought that her father didn't want to give her the necklace. But because he loved her so much, he had to give it to her. She felt that she had embarrassed her father, so she was wrong. That was why she burst into tears all of a sudden. It had to be said that the child's imagination was really big. Chen Shi quickly held the little fellow in his arms and comforted her quickly. "Papa didn't cry. Papa didn't cry. Nian, good girl. Don't cry. Mommy's necklace is yours. Come on, Papa will put it on for you." After that, Chen Shi gently helped the little fellow up. After she stood up, he quickly put the necklace on her neck. "How is it? Does it look good?" An adult's necklace was put on a child's neck. The length of the necklace almost reached her small belly. The little fellow didn't speak and was still sobbing. Seeing this, Chen Shi hurriedly wiped her tears, then grabbed the pendant on the necklace and handed it to the little fellow. He comforted her softly. "Nian, look, do you like this pendant? If you don't like it, I'll buy you another one you like. What do you think?" Hearing this, the little fellow sniffled and took the pendant with grievance. She held the pendant in her hand and pouted. "I like this necklace. I don't want to buy new ones." All right. As long as you like it, this necklace will be yours from now on, all right?" All right, after a few words of consolation, the little fellow finally nodded. Seeing this, Chin-shi finally heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly pulled the little fellow to his side, and then stood up with her in his arms. How scary. Just a moment of carelessness and I actually made the child cry. The child's cries came and went quickly. Chin-shi held the little fellow in his arms and teased her a few times. Then, her tears turned into laughter. She held the pendant in her hand and kept playing with it. It seemed that she really liked this necklace. After Chin-shi saw that she didn't have any problems, he turned to look at Feng Mintai, who was outside the house. What kind of person was Feng Mintai? As soon as the little fellow started crying, he sneaked out of the courtyard, giving Chin-shi enough space for parent-child interaction. After Chin-shi carried the little fellow out of the main hall, Feng Mintai was still pretending to study the leaves under his feet in the courtyard. Boss Feng, you can go back first. I'll transfer the 1 million to your card first. Don't worry, if I wait for the person I want to see, I'll transfer the remaining 9 million immediately. Oh, okay. Thank you, boss. After hearing Chin-shi's words, Feng Mintai immediately jumped as if he had been electrocuted. After thinking for a while, he licked his face and bowed slightly with a smile. Boss, you came in a hurry. Do you need me to arrange a room for you? No need. You go do your thing. I'll stay here. Ah. Feng Mintai was stunned and asked with some surprise, You'll stay here? After saying that, he pointed in the direction of the main hall. Hearing this, Chin-shi immediately asked, Why, can't I? Yes, of course. As long as you like, you can stay anywhere. Feng Mintai rubbed his hands and laughed a few times. Chin-shi didn't want to talk to him anymore, so he walked directly into the main hall and wanted to see the inner room. Seeing this, Feng Mintai hesitated for a while before reluctantly walking to the front yard. Chin-shi said that he wanted to stay here, not because he was thick-skinned and wanted to occupy the place without being invited. He actually just wanted to see Ying as soon as possible. Instead of sending someone to squat outside all day, it was better to move here directly. It was obvious that this courtyard house had been cleaned not long ago. It was probably locked because the owner had something to do far away. In that case, as long as he lived here, he would definitely meet the person who cleaned. It didn't matter who that person was, even if it was Qin Yongyan. Chin-shi wanted to ask him righteously. Where did Ying go? At the same time that the father and daughter stepped into the Qin residence. The woman in the yellow dress named Lin Qing also received a video. It was a video from the surveillance camera. The bottom left corner showed the time. The location of the surveillance video was at the entrance of Dongming Alley. There were 2 people in the surveillance video. Because the video was shot from above, she couldn't see the person's face. Seeing this, she suddenly sneered as if she was mocking him. She softly laughed and said, "Ha, that's fast." While laughing, she clicked on the video. The video wasn't long. After the 2 people walked out of the camera's range, the video ended. It was about 10 seconds from start to finish. Dongming Alley was filled with old houses, so only the entrance of the alley had such a surveillance camera. However, when she finished watching the video, the smile on her face suddenly disappeared. The woman in the yellow dress looked gloomy and clicked on the replay. After watching it carefully again, she quickly turned off the video and dialed a number. Old Meng, who else has seen this video? Only me. I just saw it and sent it to you, delete it immediately. Don't let anyone else see it. Oh, okay. After hanging up the phone, the woman in the yellow dress face turned green and then white. Finally, it all turned into a look of anger. She seemed to be very angry. However, after hesitating for a while, she clicked on the video again. When the video was halfway through, she quickly paused it and then zoomed in to watch it carefully. In the video, the man's back was facing the camera. The child in his arms was so excited that she raised her head and faced the camera. Because of this, the surveillance camera captured the front of her face. Bang! The more the woman in the yellow dress looked, the angrier she became. In a fit of anger, she lost her composure and threw the phone to the ground. The phone fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. She stared at the broken pieces on the ground in a daze. Suddenly, she covered her face with her hands, lowered her head and muttered to herself, "Sister, are you crazy? What did you do all those years?" No one answered her question. After a long time, when she put her hands down again, there was only coldness left on her face. A precaution. Chapter 96. October 1st, National Day. 9:00 in the morning. The sky on this day was impeccably blue and intoxicatingly beautiful. She moved a table from the main hall to the courtyard, then went to the west wing to move the TV to the window, facing the inner courtyard. Because he didn't buy any groceries, he bought breakfast from a snack stall outside. Porridge, steamed buns, and 2 or 3 side dishes. It was a very ordinary breakfast. The little girl didn't eat steamed buns, so she had to buy her 2 bean paste buns. After she turned on the TV, the little girl sat on a small stool, watching TV while holding a bean paste bun. Maybe it was because the taste of the bean paste bun was very ordinary. Moreover, she was spoiled by Chin-Shi's cooking skills, so after a few bites, she started to pick at it. After licking the bean paste bun, the little girl decisively threw the rest of the dough to the big cat. The big cat stuck its head out and bit the bean paste bun thrown by the little girl. Because there was still some bean paste on it, it also ate the part that was stained with bean paste first. But after all, it was the little girl's leftovers, so the big cat only licked the bean paste twice before it was gone, so it had to chew the white flour. But after chewing 2 mouthfuls of the white flour, he spat it out just like the little one. Seeing this, Chin-Shi could only shake his head and sigh. The child's appetite had been raised by him. Maybe it was because she was tired of eating bean paste. The little girl licked her lips. Today, she didn't wait for Chin-Shi to serve her and took the initiative to hold the bowl and eat the porridge. This 2-part courtyard house was very large. The area was at least 400 square meters. There were 17 rooms, not to mention the 2 courtyards in the front yard and the inner courtyard. Because of the spirit cultivation pill, the little girl's eyesight was very good. Even sitting in the middle of the courtyard, she could clearly see the TV screen in the window of the west wing. However, perhaps because it was too far away, the volume of the TV wasn't very high. After eating her fill, she moved a small stool and sat on the steps outside the west wing. She raised her small head and looked at the TV above her. She almost stuck her small face to it. The military parade had not officially started yet. It was time for the guests from various countries to enter. When the little fellow went out to buy breakfast with Chin-Shi in the morning, she heard others talking about today's military parade. Although she didn't know what a military parade was, her interest was still aroused. So when she saw the live broadcast on TV, she was a little excited. As Chin-Shi tidied up, he looked at her silly expression and couldn't help but laugh. After cleaning up the garbage on the table, Chin-Shi moved a recliner to sit under the steps and then called the little fellow over. Hearing this, the little guy immediately jumped into Chin-Shi's arms. She giggled as she rubbed against Chin-Shi's chest a few times. Then, she turned over and laid in his arms to watch TV. The National Day Military Parade was not held every year. The last one was in 2009. After many years, the National Day Military Parade was finally held again, so the people in Shangjing were very excited. In the old alleys and on the streets, they gathered in groups of 3 or 5. One of them was holding a mobile phone ready to watch the live broadcast, and a few people behind him were chatting. Some impatient people had already climbed to the roof, ready to see the fighter jets that would fly over their heads later. Because of the importance of the military parade, martial law had been implemented around Tiananmen Square as early as a day ago. All the schools and units near Chang'an Street had to be closed. All the office buildings on Chang'an Street had to be closed. The curtains on the side of the hotel facing Chang'an Street must be drawn. During the ceremony, they must not be opened without permission. In addition, some residents living near Tiananmen Square would also be evacuated. The government would pay for them to live in hotels, and the army would check the safety of each building one by one to ensure that nothing would happen during the military parade. Tickets would be given out during the military parade, but not everyone could get them. The audience had to go through strict political screening to get the tickets. Ordinary people could not get close to the scene at all, let alone go to Tiananmen Square to see it up close. This also made some of the people in Shangjing very unhappy. The military parade was at their doorstep. Although they could not see the soldiers marching, they could at least see the planes in the sky. So with this mentality, many people went out. With Tiananmen Square as the center, martial law was implemented within a 5-kilometer radius. Shangjing was quiet on this day. The streets were very deserted, and the empty streets were free for pedestrians to pass through. Although there was only one street that was controlled, there were almost no pedestrians or vehicles in the second ring road. It could be said that the streets were empty. What about the people? They were all along Chang'an Street, a few kilometers away from Tiananmen Square. Even if they could only see the parade vehicles passing by from a distance across the street, they would feel very satisfied. After all, watching it on TV and seeing it with their own eyes were two completely different experiences. 9:59 a.m. Everyone stood up. Salutes were fired. The national anthem was played. The national flag was raised. 70 salutes roared. It shocked the whole city. The little fellow was shocked and immediately looked up at the sky. The courtyard house was like a well. She sat in the well and looked up to see only a square of blue sky and white clouds. Then, in every corner of Huaxia, on the land of 9.6 million square kilometers, the prelude of the March of the Volunteer Army sounded at the same time. Papa. It's time to sing. We have to stand up. It was probably because the kindergarten teacher had taught her that when the national anthem sounded, the little fellow jumped out of Chen-Shi's arms. She jumped and tried hard to pull Chen-Shi up. Seeing this, Chen-Shi could only pinch her little face and stand up from the rocking chair very cooperatively. The father and daughter faced the TV and stood side by side. The little fellow watched TV and imitated the movements on TV. She tried hard to raise her little hand in front of her forehead. Her hands were crooked and not straight, but her little face was very tense, and she had a serious look on her face. Get up, people who don't want to be slaves, she sang a sentence sweetly. After singing it, she found that Chen-Shi next to her had no reaction. So she immediately patted Chen-Shi's thigh, pursed her mouth, and said unhappily, Papa. You have to sing too. The teacher said that we should sing the national anthem when we raise the flag. Seeing her expression, Chen-Shi knew that she was going to lose her temper. He quickly stood at attention, raised his right hand to his forehead, and then quickly said, Dad was wrong. Come on, let's sing together. After his delay, more than half of the national anthem had been sung, so Chen-Shi had to immediately sing, Get up, get up, get up. Hearing this, the little fellow immediately jumped up happily, clapped her hands and sang, We are of one heart, braving the enemy's gunfire, forward, forward, forward. After singing, she threw herself on Chen-Shi's lap, held Chen-Shi's leg, and giggled. Chen-Shi sat back in the chair with her in his arms and listened to the explanation on TV. For a moment, there was a rather emotional look on his face. The 70th anniversary of the victory of the War of Resistance was in Beijing. The 90th anniversary of the founding of the army was in MG. Chapter 97. When the marching music sounded, the long-awaited military parade finally began. When a group of soldiers slowly appeared in front of the camera, the little fellow finally saw what she liked to see. So, she jumped out of Chen-Shi's arms again. She ran to the steps of the West Wing, raised her head and stuck out her chest, waved her arms and kicked her legs, trying to imitate the handsome appearance of soldiers. The little fellow's little face was tense, and she wanted to pretend to be serious. But her cute little appearance still made Chen-Shi laugh. There were only the father and daughter in the big yard, but it didn't seem empty at all, because it was full of their laughter. The little fellow was playing happily, but at this time, Qinshi's phone rang. He took out his mobile phone and found that it was not a call, but a video call from Aunt Zhang. Seeing this, Qinshi immediately connected the video call, and then waved to the little fellow. "Hey, you little brat, don't you know how to send a text message to me during the festival? Do you have to let me take the initiative to greet you?" As soon as the video call was connected, Qinshi was about to greet Aunt Zhang, but what greeted him was Aunt Zhang's teasing. Seeing this, Qinshi immediately raised his hands and surrendered. He quickly pointed the camera at the little fellow and used her as a shield. "Grandma. Grandma. I miss you so much." As soon as the little fellow saw that it was Aunt Zhang on the other side of the video, she immediately waved her little hand wildly at the camera. Looking at her excited and happy appearance, Aunt Zhang really fell into the trap. Therefore, she didn't have time to complain about Qinshi anymore. Instead, she smiled and said, "Io, my good granddaughter, Grandma misses you too. When are you going to let Dad bring you to Rome City to play again?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately turned to look at Qinshi and asked, "Papa, when are we going to see Grandma? I miss Grandma." After hearing their conversation, Qinshi couldn't help laughing. How long had it been since they came back from Chengdu? Aunt Zhang was still blaming him for wasting money last time, but he didn't expect that she would take the initiative to let them go this time. It seemed that Aunt Zhang couldn't leave the little fellow. Thinking of this, Qinshi held the little fellow in his arms and said to her, "Come, Nian, let me say a few words to Grandma." The little fellow nodded obediently, and Qinshi pointed the camera at himself. After greeting Auntie Zhang, he said mysteriously, "Auntie Zhang, take a look." "Where is this?" While talking, Qinshi slowly turned the camera. After slowly scanning the courtyard with the camera, he turned the camera back to himself. "Hey, this is Sai Courtyard? Have you found Ying?" Auntie Zhang had lived in this place for 10 years, so she was very familiar with it. Therefore, she immediately asked excitedly, "Where's Ying?" "Let me see that girl." Qinshi shook his head helplessly and sighed. "We haven't seen her yet. Maybe it was a bad time. When we came, there was no one at home, so I just brought Nian here and planned to wait for her here." "You haven't seen her?" After hearing this, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but change her expression. In fact, she really hoped that Qinshi could find Ying. After all, she had been with Qinshi for a while, and she recognized Qinshi very much. She didn't tell Qinshi where Ying's house was because she wasn't familiar with Qinshi and wasn't sure what kind of person he was. On the other hand, she promised Ying that she wouldn't tell Qinshi. She didn't reveal any information, but Qinshi still found her, so she couldn't be blamed. Therefore, Aunt Zhang's first reaction was to be happy for them. However, she didn't expect Qinshi to still not see Ying. Where did that child go? Was she still angry with Mr. Qin? Aunt Zhang was lost in her thoughts as she thought about it. Qinshi waited for a while, but Aunt Zhang didn't say anything. After hesitating for a while, he asked carefully, "Aunt Zhang, do you know Qin Yongyan?" "Huh?" Aunt Zhang was stunned. She didn't seem to hear him clearly. Seeing this, Qinshi could only raise his voice and ask again, "I mean, you know Qin Yongyan, right?" "Of course I know him. Mr. Qin is Ying's father." Hearing this, Qinshi was a little excited. Just as he was about to say something, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but let out a long sigh. She asked with a complicated expression, "Ying hasn't told you about her family, right?" "No. Every time I asked, she was a little unhappy, so I didn't dare to ask too much." "Sigh, so that's how it is." Hearing this, Aunt Zhang immediately let out a long sigh, then slowly sighed and said, "Since you've already found her house, then I'll tell you, okay?" Hearing Auntie Zhang's words, Qinshi immediately sat up in excitement. Aunt Zhang was finally willing to tell him about Ying's family. How could he not be excited? When Auntie Zhang saw his reaction, she smiled in relief. After thinking for a while, she slowly spoke. "I remember the first time I met Ying, she was only 8 years old. She's actually quite pitiful. Her mother passed away early, so Mr. Chin asked me to take care of her. As for me, I've been a nanny for 10 whole years, not counting this little one. Aunt Zhang smiled and pointed at the little one in Chen Shi's arms. Then, she continued, Ying is different from other children. She's been very sensible and independent since she was young. She doesn't cry, throw tantrums, or cling to people. I basically only need to cook for her every day. I don't have to worry about her life too much. Mr. Chin is also quite an easygoing person, so this nanny job is quite easy and enjoyable. Unfortunately, good times don't last long. When Ying was 13, Mr. Chin was transferred to work abroad, so he couldn't be with her every day. Think about it, a 13-year-old girl who lost her mother when she was young and her father wasn't by her side every day. How pitiful is that? At that time, I often asked her why she didn't live abroad with Mr. Chin. Speaking of which, that girl was also strange. She would rather be separated from her father than go abroad. She always said that it was better here, but she didn't want to leave. There were only 3 of us in this house. Mr. Chin didn't lack money and didn't rent out the more than 10 empty rooms. So when he was transferred, the house became much quieter. In the years after that, it was just the 2 of us living in the compound you're living in now. Mr. Chin would only come back during the holidays, and every time, he would come and go in a hurry. In a flash, 10 years have passed. I watched Ying go to primary school, middle school, and high school. I was even the one who attended the parent-teacher conference for her. When she graduated from high school, Mr. Chin was finally transferred back to China. At that time, my mission was completed, so I planned to go back to Chengdu. You don't know, but on the day I left, that girl insisted on sending me to the airport. She cried so hard. I've lived with her for so many years, but I've never seen her cry like that. Sigh. At this point, Aunt Zhang's eyes also turned red. She couldn't help but cry. She was still writing at 3 in the morning, Happy Christmas Eve. Chapter 98. Perhaps it was because she was reminded of the days she spent with Ying, but Aunt Zhang couldn't help but cry. From when Ying was 8 years old to when she was 18. Aunt Zhang took care of her for 10 whole years. How many decades did one have in life? 4 years in college, 2 years after graduation, and then Chen Shi's disappearance and her pregnancy. In a flash, another 10 years had passed. How many decades did one have left in life? Chen Shi had long noticed that something was wrong with Aunt Zhang's mood, so before Aunt Zhang cried, he coaxed the little girl to watch TV. The little girl couldn't bear to see others cry. If she saw her grandmother crying, she would probably cry immediately. Chen Shi held the phone and didn't speak. After a long while. After Aunt Zhang's emotions gradually calmed down, Chen Shi asked, Aunt Zhang, does Ying have any relatives? Yes, she seems to have quite a lot of relatives, but they're not in Shangjing. I have to go home during the holidays, so I haven't seen her relatives much. Does she have any siblings? There should be a few. I've seen Ying's younger sister, who is her second uncle's daughter. She only came once. But that girl isn't close to Ying. When she came, she was cold to Ying, as if someone owed her money. I don't like that girl. Younger sister? What's her name? I'm not familiar with that girl, and it's been more than 10 years. How can I remember? Okay, Chen Shi nodded helplessly. He wanted to ask more about Ying, but at this time, Aunt Zhang's granddaughter suddenly cried. Chen Shi had no choice but to reluctantly say goodbye to Aunt Zhang. Shangjing was in the north. Therefore, after the National Day, the weather would gradually turn cold, and the temperature difference between day and night would increase. The father and daughter naturally occupied this mansion, with a market value of hundreds of millions. Every afternoon after dinner, Chen Shi would take the little girl to stroll around Shikahai. Gradually, many neighbors got to know them. It had been a long time since anyone had lived in this courtyard house. Therefore, in the beginning, some of the neighbors who still remembered Aunt Zhang and Yingying would always look at Chen Shi and his daughter suspiciously. As long as they did anything unusual, they would not hesitate to call the police. Let the outsiders see that other than the CY district in Shangjing, there was also the XC district. However, the little fellow didn't care about the strange gazes of others at all. Every time someone asked, more or less trying to test whether they were old deadbeats who had taken over someone else's house, she would proudly puff out her chest and say loudly, "This is my mommy's house. Therefore, this is my home." At this time, people would ask, "Where's your mother?" This was a very complicated question. Therefore, every time she heard this question, she would always be like a frosted eggplant, weakly stammering, "My mama went abroad and hasn't returned yet." This was what Chen Shi had told her. Her father wouldn't lie to her, so as long as they stayed here, her mother would definitely come back. She really wanted to see her mother, just like how Chen Shi also wanted to see Yingying. However, as time passed day by day, Chen Shi's heart sank day by day. Every day, Feng Mintai would pretend to pay a visit to him. Although he said it was a visit, he was actually worried that Chen Shi had already found the person he wanted, so he would renege on the debt and not pay. A clue was worth 1 million, but if Chen Shi found the person he wanted to see in this house, then the 1 million would become 10 million. After all, he was the one who found the clue to this house. However, with his punctual visits every day, Feng Mintai gradually realized that the 10 million might not be so easy to earn. Helplessly, the project was restarted. This time, they focused on Qi Myongyan. This was the only clue that could be developed again. In the purple world, the wisps of smoke stopped cold, and the rain passed through the clouds. Envied the peach leaves, the curved sill in front of the window, the swallow's nest, and the willow's vermilion door. Looking back at the first year, the misty hair fluttered in the wind, and the delicate spring. In the welcome place, only the youthful beauty was affectionate, and the jade pendant was attentive. Who knew that at this moment, the ecstasy? Vaguely smiling in front of people. Remembering the slender palm, it really became a dream. The resentment and memory of the flower should be a double literature. Carrying the mood of wine, teaching the beauty poetry, regretting in vain that the romantic has wronged people. Who should go, waiting to send the hatred, the two places equally. On October 10th, the first snow fell in the Mentugum mountain area. However, it could not be considered the first snow in Shangjing. The so-called first snow was strictly regulated. Only when more than 10 of the 20 man-made stations in Shangjing observed the phenomenon of snow, or when all 5 stations in the city, Chaoyang, Haidian, Fengtai, Shijingshan, and Observatory, observed the phenomenon of snow, or when 3 or more of the 5 stations in the city observed the phenomenon of snow, and at least one station had snowfall. Only when the snow was 0.1 millimeter could it be considered the first snow. Winter was getting closer and closer, and the locust trees in the courtyard finally lost all their leaves. They held up the graceful branches of the withered trees as if they were welcoming the coming winter. The little fellow went out less and less often. There was only one thing she liked now, and that was to hide in the warm room with the electric heater, wrapped in a quilt, and watch TV with the big cat. Shangjing was dry and cold, and Zhonghai was wet and cold. Although the temperature in Zhonghai was higher in winter, it was windy and humid. The most important thing was that there was no heating. The house in the Kangju district did not even have air conditioning, let alone heating, so the little fellow had always been afraid of winter. She did not expect that after coming to Shangjing, the electric heater in the courtyard house would make her fall in love with this winter. Chen Shi stood in the courtyard in a daze for longer and longer. His temper was also getting worse and worse. Of course, for the little fellow, Chen Shi still doted on her as usual. But for anyone other than the little fellow, Chen Shi could only laugh. Including the big cat. Although Chen Shi did not scare it much, the big cat now took the initiative to avoid Chen Shi when it saw him. Unless the little fellow held it, it did not dare to get within 5 meters of Chen Shi. Even Big Cat received this kind of treatment, not to mention the incomparably treacherous Feng Mintai. However, Feng Mintai was also a master of changing the rudder according to the wind. Since the last time he was kicked out of the courtyard by Chen Shi, every time he came back, he would not cross the Chuehua gate again. This was because he had a vague feeling that something was about to happen. If he provoked Chen Shi again, his life might be in danger. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei did not dare to call Chen Shi now. Although the influence of the energy cultivation pill had declined to the lowest point under their joint efforts. But some fires were easy to light. It was difficult to destroy them. So after a lot of hesitation and consideration, Ning Zhonghua had to summon up the courage to carefully call Chen Shi. However, Chen Shi only responded with one word. Get out. After hanging up the phone, Ning Zhonghua looked at Su Wei helplessly. Su Wei was a little confused. That was a boss above the ministerial level. Would Mr. Chen refuse? Ning Zhonghua shook his head and did not speak. Su Wei was so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks, wishing that he was the one who called just now. Ning Zhonghua patted him on the shoulder silently, motioned for him to calm down, and then walked to the window. After exhaling deeply, he could not help but sigh. A storm is coming. Wind building, it was getting colder and colder. November 21st. The little fellow received the biggest gift besides her father. New snow. When she woke up that night, Shangjing City had completely changed. The first snow of this year came earlier than before. When the little girl crawled out of Nuanyuan's bed, she found that the courtyard had completely changed. It was like being painted with white paint, and the whole courtyard was dyed white. Wrapped in silver, it was exceptionally enchanting. She put on her small cotton-padded jacket and did not wait for Chen Shi to wash her face. She had already rushed out of the room and ran to the courtyard, shouting crazily. Chapter 99. When it snows, Shangjing becomes Beiping. When we go to Hohai to see the snow, we return to the Ming and Qing dynasties. This was what the poet Yin Lichuan wrote on her blog after she went to Hohai 1 year after the snow. The plain words were enough to move many people. That year, the snow in Shangjing was very thick. As far as the eye could see, the roads and roofs were flat, which also covered a lot of the modern atmosphere. Especially in Hohai, there were very few things that were obviously modern, and there were many old houses. The heavy snow covered all the hustle and bustle of modern society. Standing in the snow, it was enough to make people feel like they were in the Ming and Qing dynasties. Shangjing was covered with snow, and the palaces were all silver. This year's first snow had been falling for an exceptionally long time. Since last night, the snowflakes had not stopped falling. It was estimated that this year would also be a year of heavy snow. It rarely snowed in Zhonghai. Poor southern children, who had lived so long, had never even seen snow. The heavy snow completely ignited the little girl's childish nature. If it wasn't for the fact that the snow wasn't too thick, she would have been rolling around on the ground. The reason why the little girl was so excited was that she had never seen snow. Johns Hopkins University. The Johns Hopkins researchers at the Johns Hopkins University published a recent research report in the journal Science that when children are faced with novel and unexpected things, they will learn more than when they are faced with ordinary things, and it will make them smarter. If it was an ordinary parent, they might have already grabbed her back to wash up, eat, and do what they should do. But Chen Shi didn't. He put the towel back in the basin, then went to the steps outside the west wing, quietly watching the little girl squatting on the ground and trying to rub a snowball. At the bottom of the steps, the snow had condensed into ice. The little girl scraped up the snow layer by layer, then put it in her hands and rubbed it into a ball. The snow was not too thick, so she rubbed it very slowly. And she didn't wear gloves. When she finally rubbed out an egg-sized snowball, her pink fingers were already red from the cold. Papa. Snowball. Snowball. The little girl ran to Chen Shi with the snowball as if it were a treasure, as if she didn't notice that the snowball was so cold that her hands hurt. Chen Shi squatted down and gently stroked her little face that was flushed with excitement. He said softly, "Be good, throw it away. We'll wash up and eat breakfast after you throw it out." Then Daddy will make a snowman with you, okay? Okay. The little guy nodded heavily. Then, he turned around and raised his hand to the back of his head. Then, he threw it out with great force. Seeing the snowballs scattered all over the ground, the little fellow immediately clapped her hands happily. Chin-shi gently held her hand and asked with concern, "Are you cold?" "Not cold." It was so cold that his bones hurt, but the little guy still laughed and shook his head. Chin-shi didn't point it out. After wrapping her little hand in his true essence, he picked her up and said, "Let's go. Daddy will take you to wash your face, eat, and make a snowman. Make a snowman. Make a snowman." With the temptation of a snowman, the little girl immediately followed Chin-shi to wash up. After breakfast, before Chin-shi cleared the table, she couldn't wait to take Chin-shi to the yard. There was not much snow on the ground, so Chin-shi slowly raised his hands in the little girl's slightly excited cry. A gust of wind suddenly blew in the small yard. That year, the first snow in Shangjing was particularly heavy. At the entrance of Dongming Alley, a Spencer slowly came to a stop. From the outside, this car was somewhat similar to a Jinbei car, except that it had a Mercedes-Benz logo. There was only one woman sitting in the big car. She was holding a glass of red wine and shaking it slightly. After the car stopped, the woman lifted the curtain and looked inside. After confirming that she had arrived at the station, she lowered the partition between the car and the driver's seat, and then asked, "Old Meng, when did they live here?" "It should be September 29th. You told me not to get close to here, so I'm not very sure about the specific time." "September 29th? The woman gently put the wine glass on the table in front of her, and then laughed softly. She seemed to be talking to herself, and said softly, "Today is November 21st. Do they really think of this as their own home?" After that, she opened the door and got out of the car. The woman was very tall, and she was wearing a Canada coat, goose beige coat and a pair of black Balenciaga boots. Looking at her dress, she looked like a model who came to the old street for a photo shoot. It was still snowing, and the stalls on the old street were not open today. After all, it was better to stay at home in this cold weather. The bluestone road of the old street was covered with snow, and the sound of the woman's footsteps echoed in the empty alley. A few minutes later, the woman came to the door of the courtyard. She didn't hesitate and directly pushed the door open. Chen-shi and the little girl were squatting in the middle of the yard, making a snowman. He had already noticed the movement in the alley, so he stopped what he was doing. Therefore, when the woman pushed the door open and entered, Chen-shi also stood up. One was in front of the screen wall in the southeast corner, and the other was in the middle of the yard in front of the main hall. The two of them glanced at each other. However, the tall courtyard wall blocked their view. Chen-shi stood still. The little girl was busy adding bricks and tiles to the snowman, so she didn't notice Chen-shi's strange behavior. The woman moved. Tap, 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 her heels stepped on the stone floor, making a crisp sound. Every time the sound rang, it was like a morning bell, beating Chen-shi's chest fiercely. He stared blankly at the drooping flower gate that separated the inner and outer courtyards. The woman walked steadily, and soon crossed the front yard and came to the drooping flower gate. And at this moment, Chen-shi also saw her face clearly. She wasn't Ying. An indescribable feeling immediately surged in Chen-shi's heart. He stared blankly as the woman walked straight towards him. The little girl squatted on the ground, holding a ball of snow with both hands, and was about to slap it on the snowman. The woman was getting closer and closer, and her footsteps finally startled the little girl. The little girl turned her head and glanced at the woman who suddenly appeared. Then, she suddenly grinned, as if she was very happy, and asked sweetly, "Sister, do you want to make a snowman with us?" The woman didn't speak. The little girl waited for a while. Seeing that she did not speak, he no longer paid attention to her and continued to build his own snowman, huffing and puffing. The woman silently looked at the little girl squatting on the ground. After a long while, she suddenly asked, "What's her name?" Her voice sounded very cold. Just like today's weather, although the sun was bright, there were still snowflakes floating. Chen Shi was stunned for a moment, then solemnly replied, Chen Nian. What about you? Chen Shi. Chen Shi? After softly repeating this name, the woman finally shifted her gaze from the little girl to Chen Shi. My name is Qin Shueching. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Thank you, brother, Xia Zhongyu, for the 20,000 reward. I have to apologize to you here. It's not that I don't want to add more, it's because I really can't write that much. It's not that I'm not working hard, I've really done my best. I've been racking my brains every day to write. Please forgive me. Sincerely. This book's reader group, 5117933123. Chapter 100. My name is Qin Shueching. Her voice was as bright as the sun today, but her tone was as cold as the fluttering snowflakes. The snowflakes drifted into the necks of the passers-by. It was cold, and people couldn't help but shiver. They had no choice but to pull their clothes closer. Qin Shueching. His surname was also Qin. Upon closer inspection, her appearance actually bore some resemblance to Yingying. However, the cold aura she exuded was worlds apart from Yingying's. If they had met on the road, perhaps even Chen Shi wouldn't have been able to recognize her. This woman with a cold expression in front of him was actually Yingying's sister. Auntie Zhang had said that Yingying had a younger sister who was her second uncle's daughter. If he was not mistaken, it was the woman in front of him. After hearing the woman's self-introduction, Chen Shi, who had been a little hesitant, immediately stepped forward and said very politely, hello, hello. As he spoke, Chen Shi extended his right hand to her. To be honest, this was the first time he had encountered such a situation in his hundreds of years of life. She was his sister-in-law, after all. There was an old saying in Shangjing, the sister-in-law is half of the brother-in-law's ass. It meant that it would be a waste not to feel pain, and it would be a waste not to touch it. In fact, it was all caused by the traditional feudal thinking of the past. It was easier to get familiar with people. Even if they were discovered, his mother-in-law would turn a blind eye to it. After all, they used to be very particular about not airing their dirty linen in public. Chen Shi didn't have such disgusting thoughts. He was just a little nervous because it was his first time meeting Yingying's relatives. Yes, nervous. He was afraid that he would leave a bad first impression on this woman named Qin Shueching. This had nothing to do with status, strength, or cultivation. Instead, it was directly related to Yingying's position in his heart. As the saying goes, love a house, love its crow. Chen Shi loved Yingying very much, so naturally, he would show enough kindness to her family. However, what Chen Shi didn't expect was, this was the first time the two of them had met. However, Qin Shueching seemed to hold a certain degree of hostility towards him. Do you see the words outside? This is the Qin clan. You can leave. Her tone was very calm, as if she was just narrating a very simple matter. Hearing this, Chen Shi looked at her with some surprise. After being stunned for a moment, Chen Shi gently shook his head and withdrew his right hand that was expressing goodwill. I'm waiting for Yingying. Once I see her, I'll leave. She won't come. Qin Shueching glanced at Chen Shi and then looked at the little fellow again. However, when she saw the little fellow's silly look, she didn't like him. Instead, a trace of imperceptible disgust flashed through her eyes. If I were you, I would take the child and go as far away as possible now. Why? Chen Shi seemed to be a little puzzled. Qin Shueching didn't answer immediately. She just looked at the little fellow silently, as if she was seriously thinking about something. After a long period of silence, she looked at Chen Shi again and said calmly, because you don't deserve it. I don't deserve it? As if he had heard a big joke, Chen Shi suddenly couldn't help laughing. He shook his head and chuckled involuntarily. You mean that your family is very particular about matching in social status, right? Qin Shueching was silent. Shi pointed to the main hall behind him and asked with a smile, "It's the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. Why, the Great Revolution didn't sweep away your stubborn feudal ideas?" Hearing this, Qin Shuiqing's expression, which had never changed since ancient times, finally relaxed a little. She sighed softly. With some doubts, she said softly as if she was talking to herself, "I really don't understand what my sister is thinking. She actually gave birth to a daughter for you." The smile on Shi's face disappeared. This was because Zhao Yuan had once said something similar. If only Qin Shuiqing wasn't his sister-in-law. Shi really didn't expect that his first meeting with his sister-in-law would end up like this. The atmosphere in the yard suddenly dropped to the freezing point. However, Qin Shuiqing obviously didn't care about Shi's feelings. After thinking for a while, she sighed softly with a kind of almost pity in her eyes. "Well, I'll tell you why." After that, Qin Shuiqing raised her delicate hand. Her fingers were very beautiful, white and slender and without impurities, as perfect as cold jade. Then, she shook her 5 fingers gently. An invisible force shot out in an instant and hit the snowman in front of the little fellow. Bang! The snowman collapsed in an instant, turning into countless pieces of snow that drifted in all directions. She flicked her 5 fingers and hit the snowman 10 feet away. The sudden turn of events stunned the little fellow. She was holding a ball of ice and was about to hit the snowman's head with the ice in her hand. But in the blink of an eye, the snowman disappeared. The snowman that she had worked hard to build for a long time had turned into countless pieces and completely disappeared in front of her eyes. The little fellow looked down at the original position of the snowman. There was only a thick layer of snow left there. "Papa?" The little fellow squatted on the ground and held the ice. She looked up at Shi in confusion. Her eyes were full of doubts. Where did the snowman go? She looked down at the original position of the snowman again until she was sure that the snowman was really gone. Then, with a wah sound, he suddenly burst into tears. In fact, Shi could have stopped Qin Shuiqing's behavior. But he didn't. Because of this woman's actions, he suddenly had a kind of enlightenment. However, it was precisely because of his carelessness that the little fellow began to wail in grief. So, Shi quickly squatted down and gently held the little fellow in his arms. The little fellow cried sadly. As soon as Shi stretched out his hand, she rushed directly into Shi's arms, and then tightly hugged his neck. She pursed her lips and cried loudly, "Papa, the snowman is gone, the snowman is gone, good girl, Nian Nian, don't cry. Papa will show you a magic trick, okay?" However, the only response he got was the little fellow's loud cries full of energy. Shi stopped talking and slowly stood up with her in his arms. The little fellow cried on Shi's shoulder. Her pitiful appearance was really pitiful. Shi gently patted her head and comforted her with a few words. Then he turned his head and calmly said to Qin Shuiqing, "You scared my daughter." This time, it was Qin Shuiqing's turn to be stunned. "You know what? If you weren't Yingying's sister, you would have died 10,000 times by now. I want to reason with you, but you have to talk to me about strength, then I'll show you what strength is." As soon as he finished speaking, the wind and snow all over the sky suddenly became stronger. Then, a tornado strangely blew in the yard. All the snowflakes above the yard were rolled into the wind column. The originally invisible wind column seemed to have become a large white funnel at this moment. And the center of the funnel was where the snowman was just now. Shi stood beside the snowman, holding the little fellow in his left hand and slowly stretched out his right hand. Countless snowflakes continued to fall on the snow pile under the guidance of the wind. Then, the snowman slowly condensed into a shape at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then became bigger and bigger. What was happening in front of her eyes was completely beyond Qin Shuiqing's imagination. She stared at the man holding the child in a daze and stepped back a few steps in fear. The snowman was growing taller and taller. In just a few breaths, it had become a super large snowman more than 3 meters tall. This also made Qin Shuiqing's beautiful eyes almost pop out. What was happening in front of her eyes could not be done by human strength. Thinking of this, she could not help but ask with a trembling voice, Who are you? Me? Hearing this, Qin chuckled softly. Chapter 101. In the Sihiyuan. The sudden gust of wind finally subsided. The heavy snowfall was actually not a good sign. As the saying goes, timely snow indicates a bumper year. Only a moderate amount of snow could be called timely snow. A moderate amount of snow could not only kill insects and keep warm, but also provide water for crops, and would not crush the crops. This was the sign of a bumper year. The snow stopped. The little fellow stared blankly at the huge snowman in front of her. The scene that unfolded before her eyes had completely stunned her. She opened her mouth involuntarily. Even if she did not cry again, her little nose was twitching unconsciously. She didn't even need Qin to coax her, she had already completely forgotten about crying. Papa, this snowman is so big, the little girl raised her little head slightly. Her shocked expression immediately made Qin unable to help but smile. Seeing her adorable appearance, Qin's mood couldn't help but improve a lot. Muah. After kissing the little fellow's face heavily, Qin looked at her and asked softly, What do you think? Do you like this snowman? Yes. Qin's question made the little fellow come to her senses. Therefore, she immediately sat in his arms and began to dance. Papa, put me down. I want to play with the snowman. Qin quickly put her down. As soon as she stepped on the ground, the little fellow threw herself into the snowman's arms. The snowman wouldn't carry her, so she plunged her small body into the snow. The falling snow kept falling on the little fellow's head, and some even fell into her clothes. Although she was shivering because of the cold, she enjoyed it and giggled against the snowman. Looking at how excited she was probably about to bury her head in a pile of snow. Qin put down the little fellow and then turned to look at Qin Shueching. At this time, Qin Shueching had also come to her senses. She originally thought that Qin was just an ordinary person, but she didn't expect that Qin was actually a necromancer. Furthermore, with the means that Qin had just displayed, his realm might have even reached the level of cultivation above the Dao entry realm. Han Fizi human leader, moreover, the cultivators of magic are incompatible with the ministers of the path. How do you explain this? If the master has a warlock, then the high minister will not be able to make a decision, and the high minister will not dare to sell the high minister. If the high minister controls the power and influence, then the way of the master will be clear. Records of the grand historian, Huainan's Hangshan biographies, in the past, Qin Ju followed the path of the saint and killed the sorcerers. He burned the book, abandoning etiquette and righteousness and relying on deceit. He accepted the punishment and turned the millet of the sea into the West River. Han Wang Fu's treatise on the hidden husband, Virtuous Men's Difficulty. Those who are weak in virtue will have a bad impression of good deeds, those who are in political turmoil will have a bad impression of governance. This is the reason why the Qin dynasty killed Yu and trapped the warlocks. Necromancers were necromancers, also known as warlocks. They were adept at worshipping ghosts and gods, concocting pills to achieve longevity, and were even known as spellcasters. For example, the hermit expert who allowed Ning Zhonghua to live for more than 50 years was most likely a necromancer. The necromancer lineage had a long history, but now, it had almost disappeared from the world. Even the legends about necromancers were pitifully few. Most of the remaining branches of the necromancer lineage lived in seclusion deep in the mountains, maintaining the ancient tradition of passing down one lineage to a single person. The culprit behind the decline of the necromancer lineage was actually the first emperor in the history of Hua Xia, Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang burned books and buried Confucians. This was a very cruel history. There were many historical records about this, and the historians of the past dynasties also had many discussions about it. However, the strange thing was that all kinds of books had detailed records of the burning of books, but the records of the burying of Confucians were very vague. In fact, this was because Qin Shi Huang did not kill Confucian scholars at all, but necromancers. The reason why Qin Shi Huang wanted to kill necromancers and swear to cut off the inheritance of necromancers was very simple. Back then, necromancer Su Fu was ordered by Qin Shi Huang to lead 3,000 boys and girls to the East Sea to search for the legendary Penglai, Fangzhong, and Yingzhou immortal mountains to find the elixir of immortality. However, after Su Fu left, there was no news of him and he never returned to Huaxia. Qin Shi Huang, who realized that he had been deceived, was furious and vented his anger on the necromancer lineage. He hatefully killed countless necromancers, causing the necromancer lineage to almost be cut off. After the Eastern Han dynasty, it was already a long time ago from the Qin dynasty. The public opinion of the Qin dynasty, as well as the status of the Confucian school at that time, and the popularity of the modern literature school, distorted the facts and completely twisted the story of Qin Shi Huang deceiving necromancers into Qin Shi Huang deceiving Confucians. To put it bluntly, Qin Shi Huang was framed, which was why he was cursed by the Confucian school for more than 1,000 years. As for whether this was revenge on Qin Shi Huang by the remnants of the necromancers, no one knew. After all, history had long turned to dust. With a flip of his hand, he could create clouds and rain with a flip of his hand. This kind of heaven-defying means that could create clouds and rain with a flip of his hand was clearly not an existence that Qin Wanqing could deal with. She couldn't help but feel afraid and wanted to leave this strange place as soon as possible. However, since she was already here, how could Qin Shi let her go? This was his sister-in-law who had a lot to do with Yingying. He had to keep her. Therefore, as soon as Qin Shueqing turned around, Qin Shi shouted at the big cat, keep the guest. Meow. The big cat had been living in fear all day recently. Now that it finally had a chance to show off, it naturally worked hard. Thus, just as Qin Wanqing took a step forward, a voice rang out. The big cat, who had been squatting on the steps of the west wing, had turned into a black shadow and rushed to the drooping flower door in an instant. As its body grew rapidly, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but widen her eyes. Monster? The big cat showed its true form. Its front legs were slightly bent, and its back legs were on the ground. Its body was slightly arched, and its eyes were fixed on Qin Shueqing. It even grinned, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. Seeing this, Qin Wanqing had no choice but to stop in her tracks. She hesitated for a moment, then turned around and shouted at Qin Shi, "Who are you?" Hearing this, Qin Shi could only shake his head and say helplessly, "I seem to remember telling you. My name is Qin Shi. I am Qin Ruoying's husband, Qin Nian's father." You. Qin Shueqing stomped her foot angrily. She didn't know what to do now. Not to mention this unfathomable man, even the strange monster behind her was something she couldn't guarantee that she could walk past it unscathed. Just as Qin Shueqing was feeling vexed, the little girl suddenly saw the big cat squatting in front of the drooping flower door. She had seen too many amazing things today. But at this moment, when she saw the big cat's enlarged appearance, she couldn't help but raise her small hand and rub her eyes. "Big cat? Is that you?" The little girl and the big cat had been together for so long that they even used the same blanket. Therefore, almost without much thought, the little girl realized that this huge black panther was very similar to her big cat. In order to confirm its guess, the little brat ran toward the drooping flower gate. Meow, boss was here, so the big cat could only meow obediently as a greeting. After hearing that familiar voice, the little girl was excited. She didn't dare to approach at first, but when she heard the big cat's meow, she immediately opened her arms and pounced on it, then hugged the big cat's head. "Big cat. Big cat. Big cat. It's really you." The little girl was too excited, so she used her small hands to rub the big cat's head. The big cat's face was rubbed out of shape, but it didn't dare to hide. So it could only retract the barbs on its tongue and stick out its tongue to lick the little girl until she didn't have time to rub it again. The little girl hugged the big cat and giggled happily. But then, an idea suddenly appeared in her mind, so she immediately shouted happily, "Big cat! Can I ride you?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. So, without waiting for the big cat to say anything, she was already hugging the big cat's neck and jumping with all her strength, trying to climb up its back. Unfortunately, she was too short. After the big cat grew up, it was at least 2/3 of her height, so the little girl couldn't climb up at all. Seeing this, the big cat could only obediently lower its body and let her ride on it. After the little girl sat down, the big cat stood up again. And the little girl hugged the big cat's neck with both hands, lying on top of it and giggling. "Big cat! Big cat! Go, go, go!" In the courtyard. The big cat carried the little girl on its back, and under her constant urging, it had no choice but to run in circles around the courtyard. It didn't dare to run too fast, afraid that the little girl would fall. If the little girl accidentally fell, it estimated that all 4 of its legs would be broken by Qin Shi. So it was better to be careful. Qin Shuiqing stood in the same place, and her mind was blank. She stared blankly at everything that was happening in front of her. While in a trance, she felt dizzy. Thank you to the boss, reading books is like life, for the 20,000 reward. Thank you to the boss, a mess, for the 10,000 reward. Thank you to the boss, Assad, for the 30,000 reward. This book's reader group, 5117931223 group name, Destroy Earth Strategic Headquarters. Chapter 102. In the Qin family's courtyard. It should have been a place Qin Shuiqing was very familiar with. But now, this place felt very strange to her. It was all because of those 2 uninvited guests. No, it was 3. Because this black cat, which seemed to be a pet, was at least a monster that had cultivated for hundreds of years. Nian rode the big cat and jumped around the courtyard. In order to prevent her from falling, Qin Shi specially put a rope around the big cat's neck and made a simple rein for her. The little fellow was amazing now. In addition to hide and seek and 123 wooden men, she finally had one more entertainment, riding the big cat. Riding the big cat was much more fun than riding Papa, so she didn't want to get down after riding it. She stuck to the big cat. It had no choice but to take her slowly round and round. Qin Shuiqing stood on the steps of the east wing, looking at the child in front of her who was riding the Black Panther in circles, but she was very upset. This child was her sister's daughter, so what was her relationship with her? She frowned and thought for a while before she finally figured it out. She should be the child's aunt, and the child should be her niece. Aunt? Niece? Qin Shuiqing stood on the steps, slightly lost in thought. At this time, the little fellow rode the big cat in front of her. "Sister, do you want to play with me? I'll invite you to ride the big cat." Nian didn't know that her snowman was destroyed by the woman in front of her, so she was very friendly to this strange woman who suddenly appeared in their house. However, after hearing her words, Qin Shuiqing glared at the little fellow with slight disgust. The little fellow was so happy that she didn't realize that this woman didn't like her very much. However, the big cat under her felt it. So the big cat immediately grinned and growled. Meow. With a low growl of indignation, the big cat took the little guy and walked past her from behind. Looking at the big cat's attitude, it was also as arrogant as a pushover. It was not willing to let the little guy talk to this woman at all. The reason why Qin Shuiqing was still standing here was because of Qin Shuiqing. It wasn't that she didn't want to leave, but she couldn't. Every time she tried to leave, Qin Shi would always use a method she couldn't understand to grab her back. It was as if there was an invisible hand stopping her. Even if she wanted to climb over the wall to escape, that hand would grab her and put her back into the courtyard. It was like being trapped in a toy castle. And she was just one of the toy soldiers. This kind of celestial means also completely cut off Qin Shuiqing's idea of escape. Tao initiation, Dharma cultivation, ascension. The lineage of necromancers was too mysterious. Although Qin Shuiqing had heard about it a long time ago, she didn't expect that a real necromancer with cultivation would be so terrible. Therefore, she was also very honored to become Qin Shi's captive. Although she was a captive, she was actually treated well. Except for not being able to leave the courtyard, Qin Shi didn't do anything to her. Or it could be said that Qin Shi didn't dare to do anything to her. Did he want to tie her up and hang her upside down with a whip dripping wax? She was his sister-in-law, not an outsider. They were all family. Obviously, Qin Shi couldn't offend her too much. Qin Shi only had one purpose, and that was to make her tell him where Ying was. Perhaps seeing that Qin Shi didn't dare to do anything to her, Qin Shueqing simply closed her mouth and refused to say a word. Qin Shi couldn't do anything to her, so he could only let her be. His sister-in-law had just arrived. As her brother-in-law, he still had to be a little polite to her. However, Qin Shi's patience was always limited. Therefore, he could only hope that Qin Shueqing wouldn't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Otherwise, it would be embarrassing for everyone. Obviously, it wouldn't be a good thing. Because the little fellow didn't like to eat outside food, Qin Shi had already started to cook as early as the second day after she moved in. Today, there were distinguished guests, so Qin Shi made a particularly sumptuous meal. 4 dishes and a soup, all of which were main dishes. One of the dishes was braised shark's fin in yellow sauce. This dish was characterized by its bright apricot yellow color, soft and tender meat, extremely mellow and fresh taste, and the whole wing was juicy. Because it was too cold, Qin Shi could only put the dishes on the table in the west wing. After he brought the dishes one by one, the little fellow didn't even need to be called. She rushed over on the big cat as soon as she smelled the aroma. "Papa! It smells so good. I'm hungry." "If you're hungry, wash your hands. You can eat after washing your hands." "Okay. Big cat, let's wash our hands." With the temptation of delicious food, the little mischievous girl finally didn't need Qin Shi to wait on her. She ran to wash her hands by herself. At this time, Qin Shi walked out of the room and looked at Qin Shueqing opposite him. He asked very politely, "Do you want to eat together?" As he spoke, Qin Shi turned sideways and pointed to the table behind him. However, after hearing his words, Qin Shueqing was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She immediately shouted angrily, "Bah!" After fiercely glaring at Qin Shi, she opened the door of the east wing, walked in, and slammed the door. The weather was so cold, but she still stood in the yard for so long in the cold wind. Thinking about it, it was quite silly. Qin Shi smiled softly and returned to the west wing, very satisfied. The whole yard was set up by him. As long as Qin Shueqing didn't tell him the whereabouts of Ying, she would have to obediently stay here for one more day. If I want to Baidu, I have to at least have this knowledge and know that this thing exists in advance, okay? I'm not here to teach popular science. But if I don't write, will other readers know about this? Chapter 103. Bang! With a stomach full of resentment, Qin Shueqing kicked the door of the west wing hard. However, what she got in response to her kick was an even stronger reaction force. It was obviously a wooden door, but it was as hard as the door of a bank vault. It was obvious that Qin Shi was making trouble. Qin Shueqing gritted her teeth and helplessly withdrew her right foot. Because she was so angry, her full chest rose and fell rapidly with her rapid breathing. This was great. She couldn't even open the door. But if she went back in resentment, she felt very unwilling. But if she knocked on the door properly, she couldn't bring herself to do it. The snow had stopped. But the cold wind was still whistling. Qin Shueqing stood at the door of the west wing with resentment. She didn't know what to do now. She finally understood what despair was. It was the first time she had experienced such a feeling in her life. She couldn't beat him, and she couldn't run away. With her status, it was impossible for her to curse in the streets like a shrew. What else could she do? Qin Shi was like an experienced hunter. And she was like an injured prey, being wantonly played by Qin Shi in the palm of her hand. The more Qin Shueqing thought about it, the angrier she became. So she immediately turned and walked back to the east wing. Her stubbornness also came up. She was a martial arts grandmaster in the clasping Dan realm. Even if she didn't eat or drink for a month, she wouldn't die. At worst, she would go back and slowly waste time with him. Qin Shueqing made up her mind. But when she turned and was about to leave, the door behind her suddenly opened. The little fellow turned and saw Qin Shueqing outside the room, so she immediately took the spoon and waved it happily. As she waved, she shouted happily, "Auntie! Aunt! Do you want to eat with us?" The little fellow enthusiastically invited Qin Shueqing. However, Qin Shueqing was not in the mood to eat at this moment, so she did not even turn her head and walked directly to the east wing. However, the moment she took a step forward, she was horrified to find that she could not control her body. An invisible force suddenly seized control of her body and manipulated her to slowly turn her body. At this moment, she was like a remote-controlled robot. Under the control of someone else, she walked stiffly towards the west wing. Seeing that, Qin Shueqing shouted in fear, "What did you do to me? Let me go." Qin Shi didn't pay attention to her, but smiled and controlled her to sit next to the little guy. After that, Qin Shi stroked the little girl's head and asked softly, "Nian Nian, can you go and get a bowl of rice for your aunt?" "All right." Hearing that, the little fellow immediately nodded happily, then jumped off the chair and ran to the rice cooker to fill Qin Shueqing's bowl with rice. Although she did not understand what the word aunt meant, as long as it had something to do with mama, the little fellow would show full enthusiasm. While the little fellow went to get more rice, Qin Shi turned to look at Qin Shueqing and asked with a smile, "What do you think? Isn't my daughter cute?" Qin Shueqing struggled to get rid of Qin Shi's restraint, but it was obviously in vain. Therefore, she had to scold him harshly, "Let me go. I can let you go, but you have to eat this meal first." Qin Shi smiled and pointed to the dishes on the table. Qin Shueqing did not answer, but glared at him fiercely. "Aunt, the rice." The little fellow quickly ran back with the bowl and then happily raised the bowl in front of Qin Shueqing. Seeing that, Qin Shueqing was still a little hesitant. Qin Shi did not talk nonsense with her and immediately controlled her to take the bowl from the little fellow's hand. Qin Shueqing flew into a rage and wanted to scold Qin Shi. But at this time, she found that she could move again. After being stunned for a moment, Qin Shueqing's first reaction was to leave here. But just as she moved, Qin Shi restrained her again. Qin Wanqing wanted to say something, but as soon as she said a word, it was as if someone was strangling her neck. She swallowed the words that she was about to say. Qin Shi glanced at her lightly and said calmly, "Eat." At this time, the little fellow also ran back to her seat, took the spoon and was ready to start again. After drinking a mouthful of fresh soup with great satisfaction, the little fellow found that Qin Shueqing still held the bowl just now, so she asked with some doubts, "Aunt, why don't you eat?" Seeing the little fellow's puzzled face, Qin Shueqing collapsed. After being tormented by Qin Shi, she was so angry that she was about to cry. She would rather be beaten to death by Qin Shi than be humiliated by Qin Shi so wantonly. Yes, humiliated. Like a doll, Qin Shi held her in his hand and played with her casually. She tried for a while and found that she could speak. She immediately said quickly, "Let me go, I'll eat." As soon as she finished speaking, she found that she could move. So, Qin Shueqing held the bowl in one hand and the chopsticks in the other, stiffly digging into the bowl of steaming white rice. She didn't take any food and just ate the rice. Seeing that she didn't take any food, Qin Shi said with a smile, "You're a guest. Don't just eat. Try the food I made." Hearing this, Qin Shueqing's movements paused. Then, a line of tears suddenly fell from her face. She was angry and cried because of Qin Shi. Qin Shi didn't expect that he could make his sister-in-law cry, so he quickly asked the little fellow, "Nian Nian, are you full?" "I'm full. I'm so full." "Then go watch cartoons with Big Cat." "Okay." When it came to cartoons, the little fellow was full of energy. So, when Qin Shi put her on the ground, she shouted for Big Cat to watch cartoons on the bed. After the little fellow left, Qin Shi turned to look at Qin Shueqing. At this time, Qin Shueqing had secretly wiped away the tears on her face. Let's talk. Qin Shueqing didn't say anything, but lowered her head and continued to dig into the white rice in her hand. She didn't have the arrogance she had when she first arrived. Instead, she looked more like a little woman who had been wronged. This was also the result that Qin Shi wanted. Seeing that she had finally removed the layers of shell, Qin Shi asked again, I'm really curious. Why did you have a flash of murderous intent when you first saw Ninian? Qin Shueqing was stunned. She didn't expect that Qin Shi could even feel this. You should be glad that the murderous intent in your heart disappeared in a flash. Otherwise, I think we might not even have the chance to sit here and talk. The so-called murderous intent and murderous intent, one represented the desire to kill, the other represented the preparation to kill. The two didn't seem to be very different, but there was an essential difference. The murderous intent was an idea that came out in an instant, while the murderous intent was the breath before the preparation to kill. Qin Shueqing was a master of martial arts, so every time she was ready to make a move, the muscles all over her body would naturally tighten, and the pores would immediately contract and close. If it was a master of the same level, he would naturally be able to detect all kinds of subtle changes in her body. This was the so-called murderous intent, which also meant that she was about to make a move. The murderous intent could be perceived, but the murderous intent couldn't be perceived. Because the murderous intent was just a kind of thought. Unless one could see through people's hearts, how could one perceive the thoughts of others? Qin Shi couldn't see through people's hearts. But he could infer from Qin Shueqing's subtle expression at that moment. Qin Shueqing should really be glad, the murderous intent in her heart came and went quickly. Otherwise, she would really be crushed to death by Qin Shi on the spot. Qin Shueqing didn't answer. Qin Shi smiled and continued, You are very strange. I guess you haven't even killed a chicken, but today you want to kill a child, and it's your sister's child. Tell me, why? After that, Qin Shi looked at her quietly. Qin Shueqing held the bowl and lowered her head as if she was thinking. She was silent for a long time. Qin Shi also waited for her for a long time.